Pad Thai, Thailand. Most Thai people do not consider Pad Thai a traditional dish at all. Records suggest the government engineered it in the 1930s and 1940s to solve a rice shortage, pushing people toward cheaper noodles. One government campaign, one new national dish. Picture a wok screaming with flame, noodles tossing in smoke, the whole thing done in 90 seconds. Now sitting in airport food courts from London to Los Angeles, banh mi, Vietnam. Banh mi is built around a French baguette, which colonizers left behind when they left Vietnam. Vietnamese cooks cracked it open and filled it with pickled vegetables, herbs, and chilies, turning something European into something unrecognizable. Many sources suggest this fusion started in the late 1800s in southern Vietnam. By the 2000s, diaspora communities had carried it onto best sandwich lists worldwide. Arepas, Colombia/Venezuela. Colombia and Venezuela both claim arepas as their defining national food, and the argument has never been resolved. Indigenous communities across northern South America were eating pressed corn flatbreads long before any European arrived, so neither country actually invented it. You see griddle marks pressed into the dough, the thing split open and stuffed with whatever is available. Two countries, one food, zero agreement. Doner kebab, Turkey/Germany. The doner kebab traces its rotating meat tradition to Ottoman-era Turkey, but the version most of the world eats was largely shaped by Turkish workers in 1970s Berlin. They adapted it for a new audience and built something that now outsells hamburgers across much of Europe. A vertical tower of layered meat spinning slowly, a blade shaving thin slices into a flatbread wrap, late-night takeaway from London to Sydney, built in Germany. Jerk chicken, Jamaica. The jerk technique was developed by maroon communities, people who had escaped enslavement and were hiding in Jamaica's Blue Mountains. The smoke from pimento wood was kept intentionally low so it could not be spotted from a distance. African and indigenous Taino cooking methods blended into something that survived centuries in hiding before it ever became a street food. Caribbean diaspora carried it to the UK and North America, and food festival culture in the 1980s and 1990s finished the job. Takoyaki, Japan. Takoyaki is a ball of batter filled with octopus, and it is commonly attributed to a single street vendor in Osaka in the 1930s. One person, one cast iron mold, one city, and the food conquered an entire nation. Watch a vendor flip each ball with two thin picks, then bonito flakes ripple and wave on top from the heat of the sauce. Now in every Japanese convenience store and festival circuit globally. Injera, Ethiopia. Injera is not just bread. It is the plate and the utensil at the same time. The slight sourness people sometimes notice is not a flaw. It is the result of days of deliberate fermentation. Teff, the grain it is made from, grows almost exclusively at high altitude, making this dish geographically locked to its homeland in a way very few foods are. You eat by tearing the spongy bubbled flatbread and scooping stew directly with your hands. Som tum/green papaya salad. Laos/Thailand. Som tum uses papaya that is completely unripe, hard and green, shredded and pounded in a mortar with lime juice, chili, and fish sauce. The papaya most people know is soft, sweet, and orange. This is the opposite. And here is the strange part. Papaya is not originally from Asia at all. Many sources suggest Portuguese and Spanish traders brought it from the Americas in the 16th or 17th century, and people in the Isan region figured out the unripe version was extraordinary. Pani Puri, India. Pani Puri is a crispy hollow sphere completely empty until the exact second you eat it. A vendor punches a hole in the top, pours in spiced water and filling, and hands it to you. You put the entire thing in your mouth in one go, because if you wait, it collapses, and if you bite it, shatters. Some accounts link its origin to Bihar, others to Uttar Pradesh, with no settled answer, found today at street corners, in snack aisles, and across food challenge videos worldwide. Currywurst, Germany. Currywurst is a sliced sausage covered in ketchup and dusted with curry powder, and it was invented in post-war Berlin. Records commonly attribute it to a woman named Herta Hoover, who acquired curry powder from British soldiers through a trade around 1949, mixed it with ketchup, and sold it from a stall. It became working-class fast food, spread across German culture, and now has its own dedicated museum in Berlin. One trade, one stall, one accidental national icon. Churros, Spain/Latin America. Nobody agrees where churros came from. One theory says Portuguese sailors brought the frying technique from China. Another says Spanish shepherds invented them independently over an open fire. Both camps have argued for decades. Latin America transformed them entirely with chocolate sauces and dulce de leche. Star-shaped dough pressed into bubbling oil, rolled in sugar, sold at theme parks and Christmas markets worldwide. Origin still unsettled. Tacos al pastor, Mexico. Tacos al pastor exist because of Lebanese immigration. Middle Eastern immigrants brought the vertical rotating spit to Mexico City in the early to mid-20th century. Local cooks swapped lamb for pork, added dried chili, and put a whole pineapple on top so the juices drip down the meat while it spins. Thin shaved pork on a small corn tortilla with a sliver of that pineapple. Lebanese technique, Mexican ingredients, one of the most replicated street foods on earth. Bunny chow, South Africa. Bunny chow is curry served inside a hollowed-out quarter loaf of bread, and the name has nothing to do with rabbits. Many sources link the name to Bania, a South Asian merchant community in Durban, with the dish created during apartheid-era South Africa, when restrictions on where certain people could eat made a sealed bread container both practical and necessary. The bread holds the curry, the scooped-out lid goes on top, and you eat the container along with everything inside. Born from restriction, became a national treasure. Khachapuri, Georgia. Khachapuri is a golden bread boat filled with melted cheese, with a raw egg cracked into the center at the moment of serving. You stir the egg into the hot cheese yourself, then tear the bread walls inward and drag them through the filling. Every region of Georgia makes it differently. The Algerian version is the boat. The Imaruli is round. The Magrelian has cheese on top as well as inside. It stayed within Georgia for centuries before food travel culture pushed it onto menus globally in the 2000s and 10s. Ceviche, Peru. Ceviche cooks fish using lime juice and no heat at all, the acid turning raw cubes white and firm the same way a flame would. The strange part is that this was happening along the Pacific coast long before lime existed there. Many sources cite pre-Incan communities using a local fruit called tumbo for the same effect, with lime only arriving after Spanish contact. Cubes of fish and citrus, red onion, fresh chili, no pan anywhere in sight. Lima became one of the world's great food destinations built almost entirely around this one technique. Hangi, New Zealand/Maori. Hangi is cooked underground with no visible flame, no pot, and no pan. Volcanic stones are heated until they glow, lowered into a pit. Food is wrapped and placed on top, and the whole thing is sealed with earth. From above, there is nothing to see until steam rises from the ground when it is uncovered hours later. The technique shares roots with earth oven methods across Polynesia and is one of the oldest forms of communal cooking still practiced. The earth itself is the oven. Waffle, Belgium. Belgium has two completely different waffles, and most of the world has been eating neither of them correctly. The Liège waffle has pearl sugar mixed into a dense yeasted dough, so it caramelizes against the iron, sticky and crunchy. The Brussels waffle uses a lighter batter with deep grid pockets meant to be crisp and airy. A Belgian cook brought a version to the 1964 World's Fair in New York, and the American version diverged almost immediately into something else. Every brunch menu on earth lists a Belgian waffle, and most of them are something Brussels and Liège would not fully recognize. Pho, Vietnam. Pho is Vietnam's most recognized dish globally, but its origin is more recent than most people assume. Many sources place it in northern Vietnam in the early 20th century, with some accounts suggesting French colonial influence shaped the clear broth technique. The rice noodles sit in a long simmered bone broth, herbs and bean sprouts piled on the side for you to add yourself. It spread south within Vietnam and then outward with diaspora communities after the 1970s. What looks like ancient tradition is in many ways a 20th century invention. Empanadas, Argentina/Latin America. Empanadas are filled pastry pockets eaten across nearly all of Latin America, but Argentina and several other countries treat them as a defining national food with fierce regional variation. The folded dough technique likely arrived with Spanish colonizers who brought similar pastries from Galicia in northwestern Spain. Every region fills them differently. Beef and olive in Buenos Aires, chicken and raisin in the north, seafood along the coast, baked or fried depending on where you are, sold from street stalls, bakeries, and corner shops. One pastry, an entire continent of arguments about the correct filling. Falafel, Middle East/North Africa. Falafel is fried ground chickpea or fava bean balls, and the argument about where it originated has never been resolved. Egypt claims it first with fava beans, Lebanon and Palestine both claim it with chickpeas, and none of them are willing to concede. It spread across the Middle East and North Africa and then globally through diaspora communities and vegetarian food culture in the late 20th century. Crisp, dark crust on the outside, green and soft inside from the fresh herbs mixed into the batter. One of the most widely eaten street foods on earth with an origin nobody agrees on. Bánh xèo, Vietnam. Bánh xèo is a sizzling Vietnamese crepe made from rice flour and turmeric, and the name literally translates to sizzling cake, named after the sound it makes when the batter hits the hot pan. It is filled with shrimp, pork, and bean sprouts, then folded in half and eaten by wrapping pieces in fresh lettuce and herbs. The contrast is the whole point. Crispy shell, cool greens, hot filling all at once. It stays largely off the radar compared to pho and banh mi, but is considered by many food travelers to be among the most satisfying street foods in the country. Mochi, Japan. Mochi is pounded rice, but its process of making it is almost violent. Cooked glutinous rice is beaten repeatedly with a wooden mallet in a large stone mortar until it becomes a smooth, stretchy, elastic mass unlike anything else in food. Records suggest ritual mochi pounding called mochitsuki has been practiced in Japan for over 1,000 years, originally tied to celebrations and ceremonies. The plain white ball filled with sweet red bean paste is the version most people encounter outside Japan, but savory versions, grilled versions, and soup versions exist across the country. The texture is the point, and the texture is like nothing else. Japan Teishoku. Japan's national lunch is not sushi, it is not ramen, it is a tray. A flat lacquer tray with small compartments steaming rice in one bowl, a main dish, miso soup, pickles, everything separated and in its place. It looks organized because it was built for efficiency, not tradition. Mid-20th century factories and offices needed workers fed and back at their desks fast. That tray system spread from canteens to chain restaurants to the convenience store bento sitting under bright lights right now. Every school cafeteria in Japan traces back to that tray. But what if the national lunch was designed to survive something harder than a workday? Mexico. Comida corrida. Everyone thinks Mexican food means tacos. Tacos are a street snack. The real national lunch is called comida corrida, and it is a full multi-course meal eaten slowly between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. Soup first, then rice, then a main dish. It has been the biggest meal of the day for a very long time, and the colonial schedule that arrived with Spanish settlers just made it stick harder. Small family restaurants called fondas still run on this rhythm today. Tourists eat tacos at noon and never find out this other world exists. UK. The Ploughman's Lunch. The Ploughman's Lunch feels old. Crusty bread, a thick wedge of cheddar, a jar of dark pickle on a wooden board. It sounds like something English farmers have eaten for hundreds of years. But the named version, the packaged idea of a ploughman's lunch as a traditional meal, was largely created by a marketing campaign in the 1960s to sell more cheese. The ingredients have older roots, but the identity was built on purpose. British pub culture adopted it so fully that it is now on every menu, in every supermarket, and nobody questions it. Vietnam, com bien done. Vietnam's everyday national lunch does not have a clean English translation. Com bien done means something like food for ordinary people. The price is kept low not by any law, but by an unspoken agreement between cooks and their neighborhoods. Walk in at 11:30 and there is a glass case of pre-made dishes, a big scoop of steamed rice on every tray, and a line forming fast. By 1 p.m., the best dishes are gone. This system came out of the street food economy in southern Vietnam after the war and slowly spread across the whole country. No reservation, no app, just show up on time. Ethiopia, injera with what? In Ethiopia, the bread is the plate. Injera is a large, spongy, sour flatbread, and it covers the whole eating surface. The stews and lentils, called wat, go directly on top of it. You tear off pieces of the bread and use them to scoop up the food. There are no utensils. The sour taste comes from fermentation, which commonly takes about 3 days before the bread is ready. Teff grain, what injera is made from, has been grown in the Ethiopian highlands for what records suggest is thousands of years. One injera on the table, everyone reaches in together. Sweden, Dagens Rätt Sweden made affordable lunch part of government policy. During labor reforms in the 1960s, the government pushed for subsidized lunch for workers, which is a big reason why the Dagens Rätt, meaning today's special, still shows up in almost every Swedish restaurant. Fixed price, clean plate, bread, salad, and a drink included. It was not a deal restaurants invented to attract customers. It was built into the culture from the top down. The chalkboard goes up at noon. Lunch happens. The ritual is protected. Spain, Menú del Día. Spain's national lunch is 3 courses plus bread and often a glass of wine, all for one low price. A small chalkboard outside tells you what is on today. Workers fill up long tables around 2 p.m., and the famous afternoon siesta is not about laziness. After a full 3-course meal, going straight back to work is genuinely hard. That reality got built into labor rules during the mid-20th century. Tourists who show up at noon are too early and miss the whole thing. The Menú del Día is what actually runs the country at midday. South Korea, dosirak. The Korean-packed lunchbox has a complicated history. In the 1960s through the 1980s, the box you brought to school said everything about your family. An elaborate dosirak with variety and color meant money. Plain rice with kimchi in a metal tin meant your family was getting by. The format came partly from Japanese colonial influence mixed with Korean staples and spread because factory workers needed something to carry. Now, the same metal tin is a premium product. Gourmet dosirak delivery services look beautiful on social media and cost many times more than the original. The box that once meant hardship now means style. Brazil prato feito. Brazil's working lunch is called prato feito, which means ready plate, and it is so consistent that you can order it in any city in the country and get almost the same food. Rice, beans, a protein, a small salad, and farofa, which is a golden, toasted flour that sits dry and crumbly on the side. Beans pool over the rice. The plate is always heaped high. It came from farm labor culture and moved into the cities with the workers. In most places, it still costs very little. It is treated less like a menu item and more like a basic right. Turkey, öğle yemeği. Many Turkish workplaces, schools, hospitals, and government buildings still have their own kitchen and their own cooks making lunch on site every day. The tradition traces back to Ottoman palace kitchen culture that slowly became part of everyday institutions. There are big steel pots, long ladle queues, trays, and soup always comes first. Not showing up for lunch is a little strange. Skipping it reads as antisocial. The kitchen is not a perk. It is just part of how the building works. France, le déjeuner. France has actual rules about what a school lunch must include. Multiple courses are required. A cheese course is required. A plain sandwich does not meet the standard. Even school canteens have a tablecloth feeling to them, with a small salad before the main dish and a cheese plate after. The idea that lunch is a cultural event and not just a meal goes back centuries in France. French workers on average take noticeably longer lunch breaks than most of their neighbors in Europe. Lunch is not something you rush through. USA, the desk lunch. America is one of the few wealthy countries where eating lunch at your desk is seen as a good thing. Some surveys suggest more than half of office workers regularly eat without leaving their workstation. Takeout container on the keyboard, plastic fork, no eye contact. A delivery industry worth tens of billions of dollars exists largely because of this habit. It grew out of 1980s work culture, the idea that being busy was a virtue, and a tech industry that made skipping breaks feel like dedication. Nobody passed a law making this normal. It just became the culture India, the Dhaba system. Mumbai has a lunch delivery network that routes hundreds of thousands of home-cooked meals across the city every day using bicycles, trains, and handoffs on train platforms. No GPS, no software, just color-coded chalk marks on stacked steel tins that tell each handler where the box goes next. The system started in the late 19th century to get home food to mill workers who did not want to eat canteen food. It became a business school case study. Some accounts say over 200,000 lunches move through the system daily. With almost no errors, people figured it out before computers and never stopped. Peru, Menu Criollo. Peru's national lunch often starts with ceviche, which sounds like a dinner dish but works at lunch because it is one of the fastest real dishes in the world. Raw fish, citrus juice, red onion, a little chili, and the acid does all the cooking in under 10 minutes. Technique has roots in coastal fishing culture going back a long time, and it changed shape after Spanish contact brought limes into the mix. Lima became one of the most respected food cities on earth. The ceviche traveled with that reputation. Egypt, koshari. Egypt's national lunch is pasta, rice, lentils, chickpeas, fried onion, tomato sauce, and vinegar all in one bowl. And it should not work, but it does. It has been on Cairo streets for over 150 years. The bowl gets built upside down, pressed in layers, then flipped and finished with a crown of crispy onion. Some accounts link it to Indian and British trade routes. Others say it came from Italian pasta mixing with local ingredients. There are shops that sell only koshari and nothing else, and they are full at midday every day. Nigeria jollof rice. Nigerian jollof rice is called party jollof, even when there is no party, because for a long time the smoky tomato red rice only showed up at celebrations. The most prized part is the dark layer at the bottom of the pot where the rice chars and crisps. Some records trace the dish to the Jollof Kingdom in West Africa, spreading through the region over centuries. The debate between Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal over whose jollof is best is not a joke. It is a real ongoing rivalry with dedicated fans online. Diaspora restaurants on multiple continents serve it as their main dish. Japan. Ramen is not originally Japanese. It came from Chinese wheat noodle traditions brought by immigrant communities in Japan in the early 20th century. After World War II, it nearly disappeared. What saved it was cheap flour from American post-war aid that flooded the country. People figured out what to do with it. Instant ramen followed in 1958. Then fresh ramen became a craft. Then prestige. Then museum-worthy. Some ramen shops now have waiting lists that stretch for months. A food that started as survival became one of the most obsessed over dishes on the planet. Bolivia salteña. Bolivia's most loved lunch food stops being sold at noon. The salteña is a crimped pastry packed with a dark, juicy stew, and when you bite in, the liquid rushes out, and you have to hold it over your hand to catch the drip. Shops open in the morning and close by midday. Legend says the recipe came from a woman who traveled from the Argentine city of Salta in the 19th century, and Bolivians made it so fully their own that it became a national symbol. The bakeries built their whole business around a 3-hour window. After 12 p.m., the salteña is gone, and you wait until tomorrow. The fried rice most of the world eats is not a real Chinese dish the way it is served abroad. In China, it was never a main course. It was a way to use leftover rice from the day before, and in Yangzhou, the city that claims the original, there are strict rules about what goes in it that no takeout version anywhere follows. The tradition traces to Yangzhou in Jiangsu province, connected to the wealthy canal merchant culture of the 1700s. Cantonese immigrant cooks then standardized a simplified version abroad and turned it into a side dish. Picture the wok version done correctly, grains fully separated, egg shreds visible throughout, a faint char from a flame hot enough to blister the rice without steaming it. Every Chinese restaurant version sold globally is a simplified immigrant adaptation. The original Yangzhou recipe uses specific cuts of ham, whole shrimp, and fresh egg, never mixed vegetables from a bag. But if fried rice is misunderstood, the dish everyone thinks defines Chinese cooking is even more wrong. Chow mein, as most of the world knows it, the crispy flat noodle cake or the soft saucy takeout noodles is almost entirely an overseas invention. The name is Cantonese for stir-fried noodles, but the specific dish evolved in American and British Chinese restaurant kitchens to match what local customers wanted, not what people in China were actually eating. Cantonese immigrant cooks built it in the United States from the late 1800s onward. Picture the crispy version. A flat noodle cake pressed into a wok until the edges brown and the center stays soft, then covered in a glossy sauce. In China, stir-fried noodles exist in hundreds of regional forms and none of them look much like the takeout version. The dish is more American than Chinese at this point. The one dish that actually does define how China eats every single morning, eaten by more people than almost anything else, almost nobody outside China has ever heard of. Lanzhou beef noodle soup is estimated to be served in several million bowls every morning across China, which makes it arguably the most eaten breakfast in the country, and it is almost unknown outside China. A cook pulls the noodles from a single strand of dough to order, stretching one piece into 8 parallel threads in one motion, arms fully extended in under 2 minutes per bowl. The dish comes from Lanzhou in Gansu province, built by the Hui Muslim community there, so it's combining Central Asian wheat tradition with Chinese bone broth technique. Lanzhou noodle chains have expanded across China but remain largely invisible in the West. Every bowl finishes the same way without exception: a white radish slice, fresh coriander, a float of red chili oil in that exact order every time. Deviation from that sequence is considered wrong. The numbness that defines a completely different region of China is just as unfamiliar to outsiders, even though Sichuan food has been trendy for years. The burning sensation in Sichuan food is not the only thing happening. The numbing sensation does not come from chili at all. It comes from Sichuan peppercorn, which triggers a specific nerve response that makes the lips and tongue feel as though they are vibrating at a low frequency. Hot and numbing together is called mala. And it is a deliberate flavor combination, not a side effect. Mapo tofu was reportedly invented by a woman named Chen in 1800s Chengdu, and the dish is named after her face, which was pockmarked. Mapo means pockmarked old woman. Picture deep red chili oil pooling around white tofu cubes in a clay pot, tiny Sichuan peppercorns dotting the surface, the whole thing still bubbling. Mapo tofu is now one of the most searched Chinese recipes globally, and instant versions are sold across Asia and in Chinese supermarkets worldwide. Sichuan built its identity on bold heat, but the cuisine directly to its north built its identity on something more fundamental: feeding emperors. Peking duck is inflated with air before it is roasted. After slaughter, air is pumped between the skin and the fat layer to separate them. And that separation is what creates the crackling skin that defines the dish. The skin and the meat are then carved as 2 separate courses at the table. A full traditional service adds a third course, soup made from the carcass after the meat is removed. Most restaurants outside China serve only the first course and consider that sufficient. Records trace it to imperial court kitchens going back to the Yuan dynasty, and Beijing codified the modern form. Picture a whole lacquered duck hanging inside a wood-burning oven, the copper-colored skin pulled tight over the inflated frame. fat dripping from the cavity. Traditional service calls for the duck to be carved into exactly 108 pieces tableside. The number is considered auspicious. Most restaurants abroad no longer follow this. While Beijing built its identity on court cooking, the South built its identity on the opposite, the freshest ingredients possible, cooked as simply as possible. Dim sum is not a dish. It is a dining ritual called yum cha, which means drink tea, and the food was originally secondary to the tea. The dumplings and small plates were added later as a reason for travelers and merchants to stay longer at tea houses along trade routes. Ordering food was the afterthought. The tradition traces to Guangdong tea house culture, with records suggesting Song Dynasty roadside rest stop origins. Cantonese emigration then carried the ritual to every major city with a Chinatown worldwide. Picture a trolley cart rolling between crowded tables, stacked bamboo steamers dripping condensation one on top of the other 6 high. Hargao, siu mai, and char siu bao are now globally recognized. Hong Kong is still considered the benchmark for quality. The ritual of sharing many small dishes at a loud table is the actual point of the whole thing. Cantonese cooking has a second side that is almost the opposite of the communal tea house, precise, expensive, and designed to be seen before it is eaten. Cantonese roast meat shops hang their birds and cuts of pork in open glass windows, specifically so customers can judge freshness by color before ordering. The window display is a quality signal. A lacquered whole goose that has been hanging too long loses its sheen, and regulars know immediately not to buy it. The tradition connects to imperial banquet roasting techniques adapted for street trade in Guangdong. Picture the window at night, whole birds and hanging pork cuts, deep mahogany, glaze still dripping, the skin tight and glossy under the light. A single roast goose stall in Hong Kong held a Michelin star for years. Char siu roast pork is now used globally as a filling in buns, noodles, and fried rice. The technique is considered a distinct professional skill, and entire careers are built around mastering it. Moving to the Northeast, one province built the entire foundation of Chinese fine cooking, and most people have never heard its name. Dan Dan noodles were not invented in a restaurant. The name refers not to the food, but to the carrying pole vendors balanced across their shoulders, a pot of noodles on one end and a small brazier on the other. The dish was assembled on the street in front of the customer in seconds. The peanut butter version sold in most Western restaurants was not part of the original recipe. Records trace it to Chengdu street food in the mid-1800s, a fast working-class meal. Picture a vendor bent under a shoulder pole, 2 suspended pots swaying with each step through a narrow market street. The original uses sesame paste, chili oil, minced pork, preserved mustard greens, and Sichuan peppercorn. The overseas peanut butter version is now so widespread it is treated as its own separate dish. Further east, one province created a dish so slow and deliberate it was allegedly invented by accident by a poet who forgot he was cooking. Dongpo pork is deliberately overcooked by any normal standard. The pork belly is braised for hours until the fat and meat become almost indistinguishable in texture, which would be considered a failure in most cooking traditions. The story behind it says, the Song Dynasty poet Su Dongpo left the pork over the fire while he was writing and came back to find it transformed. Whether that happened exactly that way, the dish is named after him, and the accidental overcooking is now the technique. Records connect it to Hangzhou in Zhejiang province and to the Song Dynasty. Picture a single square of pork belly tied tightly with straw string, deep brown and glossy, sitting in its own small ceramic vessel, still served as a main dish in Hangzhou restaurants. The cooking time is measured in hours and is not shortened for efficiency. The East Coast built its cuisine on technique and legacy, but the Far West built its cuisine on pure endurance. Congee is rice cooked in so much water for so long that the grains dissolve completely. The result is a thick, smooth porridge that appears in some form in every Chinese province. It is eaten for breakfast, during illness, and as a late-night dish after a long evening. It is the single dish that crosses every regional boundary. Records trace rice porridge in China back thousands of years with no single regional origin. Picture a smooth white surface in a deep bowl, a half-dissolved century egg slice at the surface, thin threads of fresh ginger on top. Cantonese congee uses long-cooked pork and century egg. Fujian versions use seafood. Northeastern versions use pickled vegetables. The same base dish fragments into dozens of distinct regional identities depending on where you eat it. Rice defines the South, but the North was always a wheat culture, and the food it built from wheat has almost no equivalent anywhere else. Stinky tofu ferments in a brine that can include fermented milk, vegetables, and meat scraps, and each vendor's brine is maintained as a living culture for years, sometimes decades. A vendor does not start a new batch from scratch. They keep the brine going. The smell is deliberately extreme, but regular eaters describe the flavor as surprisingly mild. The disconnect between the smell and the taste is considered the entire point. Some accounts trace the origin to Anhui province, while others say Changsha and Taiwan developed the dominant modern styles independently. Picture dark gray cubes sitting in a small street walk, a visible plume of steam rising and carrying the scent into the surrounding street. Changsha's version is deep-fried and served with chili sauce. Taiwan's version is braised in a lighter brine. Regulars treat the smell as a signal of authenticity rather than a problem. Fermentation is one thread, but the most dramatic transformation in Chinese cooking involves something that looks almost nothing like food when the process begins. Century eggs are not aged for a century. They are cured for weeks to a few months in a mixture of clay, ash, salt, and quicklime, and the process causes the egg white to turn a dark, translucent brown, while the yolk turns greenish-gray. The transformation is chemical, not decomposition, and the texture becomes firm and creamy rather than liquid. The name is an exaggeration in translation. Records suggest the technique originated in Hunan province roughly 600 years ago and spread nationwide. Picture a cross-section of a finished egg. The dark, translucent white surrounding a gray-green yolk are with patterns inside the white that look exactly like pine branches or fine snowflakes. Those crystal patterns are why the egg is sometimes called pine flower egg in Chinese. The flavor is described as deeply savory with a slight sharp edge that fades when eaten alongside congee or cold tofu. The ingenuity in Chinese food preservation goes just as far with meat as it does with eggs. Hairy crab is eaten during a window of roughly 6 weeks each autumn. Females are eaten in October when the roe is fully developed. Males are eaten in November when the fat inside is at its richest. Buying them outside that window or from a different lake using counterfeit certification is considered a serious compromise. Yangqing Lake crabs carry the highest prestige, and counterfeit versions tied with fake certified strings became common enough that QR code authentication systems were introduced by legitimate producers. Records trace hairy crab culture in the Jiangsu Lake region to at least the Tang dynasty. Picture a small crab cracked open at the table, dense golden roe, exposed under the lifted shell, eaten with a set of tiny dedicated tools designed specifically for this one task. Hairy crab became a luxury gifting product in China, sold in branded seasonal boxes. Luxury ingredients define one end of Chinese cuisine, but the dishes that truly endure are usually the ones that started with almost nothing. Buddha Jumps Over the Wall contains up to 30 ingredients, including sea cucumber, abalone, fish maw, and dried scallop, slow-cooked together in a sealed clay pot for hours. The name comes from the legend that the aroma was so powerful it would make a meditating Buddhist monk break his vows and jump over a wall to reach it. Records trace it to elite banquet culture in Fuzhou, Fujian, in the late 1800s, connected to the port city's access to rare maritime ingredients. Picture the pot arriving at the table completely sealed, wrapped in lotus leaf and tied with string, open tableside so the aroma releases in front of the diner. High-end Chinese restaurants globally serve adapted versions using more sustainable ingredient substitutions while keeping the clay pot and the slow cook method. The unsealing at the table is still the theatrical centerpiece of the service, and the oldest dish in this entire list started with the same basic idea, bread and meat, but it predates almost everything else by centuries. Rujiamo is often described as the world's oldest sandwich. The flatbread has been baked in clay ovens in Shanxi province since at least the Qin dynasty, which predates the Roman Empire. The braised pork filling is cooked for hours with more than 20 spices and packed into a split bread pocket. The form predates the Western sandwich by roughly 2,000 years. Records trace the bread to the Zhou or Qin dynasty, with the current pork filling style developing in later centuries. Picture round flatbreads pressed directly against the inner walls of a clay oven, blackened at the edges, the hollow centers blistering from the heat. The pork is chopped directly on the bread, so the juices absorb into the crust before the bread closes around it. In Xi'an, it is simply breakfast. Abroad, it was introduced as the Chinese hamburger, a framing that helped people understand the form even if it misses the depth. And then there is the dish that connects Chinese food to the rest of the world in a way most people never think about. Char siu bao exists in two completely different forms that are considered equally authentic. The steamed white bun has a soft, doughy exterior. The baked version has a glazed, slightly sweet crust, same filling, different behavior, different context. The baked version was developed for takeaway. The steamed version was designed for the dim sum table. Both are sold side by side in Hong Kong bakeries every morning. The tradition comes from Guangdong and developed as both a dim sum item and a street bakery product running in parallel. Picture a baked bun split open showing the glossy char siu pork filling inside, the crust golden. In the top split by a deliberate crack that formed during baking. That crack is intentional. The dough is scored or naturally splits to reveal the filling. In Cantonese bakeries, the crack signals that the bun baked correctly. No crack means something went wrong. The bun is everywhere, but the ingredient inside it, the char siu itself, is a technique entire careers are built around mastering. General Tso's chicken does not exist in China. It was created in New York in the 1970s, credited to a Hunanese chef named Peng Chong Kuei, who adapted his cooking for American tastes. The sweet, deep-fried format is almost the opposite of actual Hunanese cooking, which is famously direct in its heat and sour notes. General Tso was a real military figure from Hunan in the 1800s who almost certainly never tasted the dish named after him. The recipe spread across American Chinese restaurant menus within a decade of its invention. Picture dark, sauce-coated fried chicken pieces piled high in a bowl, dried red chilies scattered across the top, more for appearance than heat. The sauce thick and glossy and sweet. The dish is now so embedded in American food culture it appears on grocery store frozen meal packaging. It has since been reverse imported into some restaurants inside China, marketed specifically as the American version, as a novelty item for Chinese diners curious about how their food was transformed abroad. The fortune cookie is not Chinese. It was likely invented in California in the early 1900s by Japanese immigrants, adapted from a Kyoto temple cookie tradition that used a folded wafer to carry written messages. American Chinese restaurants adopted it widely after World War II, when many Japanese-owned businesses closed and the cookies became available to new buyers. China has no tradition of fortune cookies. When fortune cookies were exported to China in the 1990s, they were marketed there as genuinely American food because that is what they are. Some accounts credit a Japanese-American man in San Francisco, others point to Los Angeles, and the records conflict enough that no single founder has been settled on. Picture a fortune cookie cracked cleanly in half, the pale vanilla wafer split at the seam, a thin paper slip visible inside with a printed message. They are now mass-produced by the billions, primarily in the United States. The fortune cookie is the single most globally recognized symbol of Chinese restaurant culture. It came from Japan, was adopted by America, and has almost nothing to do with China. Tteokbokki is one of the most recognizable foods on any Korean street, but the fiery red version simmering in gochujang sauce at every tent stall is less than a century old. The original recipe came from royal court kitchens and used soy sauce with sliced beef, and there was no chili heat at all. The shift happened after the Korean War, when wheat flour and gochujang became widely available and affordable at the same time. Hojangmacha tent stalls spread the new spicy version street by street through South Korean cities from the mid-20th century onward. Picture the rice cakes themselves, dense white cylinders made by pounding steamed rice flour into a tight dough, then rolling and slicing it into uniform tubes. Today, instant tteokbokki cups sit on convenience store shelves from Seoul to Los Angeles, and the dish appears at virtually every Korean night market on the planet. Tteokbokki is the anchor of the stall, but the item always served right beside it has an even stranger origin story. Korean fish cake skewers look simple, just wavy beige sheets threaded onto long metal rods and bobbing in warm broth. But the texture gives away the secret. The springy bite comes from the fact that fish cake is not made from a single fish. It is a processed blend of several white fish varieties, pounded into a smooth paste and shaped into sheets. Many sources trace the technique directly to Japanese kamaboko fish paste, which spread to Korea in the early 20th century and was adapted into the wavy folded format seen at street stalls today. The paste is stretched into thin sheets, accordion-pleated, and threaded onto skewers before being simmered in anchovy broth. Those folds matter because they increase the surface area, letting the savory broth soak through evenly. Today, vendors keep the skewers warm in large vats at outdoor stalls, and the leftover broth is served free in small cups as a warming drink alongside the food. Fish cake is savory and familiar, but the next item looks like a simple snack and carries a history that most people do not expect. Hotteok is the golden disc pressed flat on a griddle until it puffs and browns, and the moment a vendor cuts it open, caramel dark brown sugar fills the air. The surprising part is that hotteok is not a native Korean invention at all. Many sources point to Chinese merchants arriving at Korean port cities like Incheon in the late 1800s, who brought a filled bread tradition with them. Koreans changed the filling from savory to sweet brown sugar and cinnamon and made it entirely their own. The dough is yeasted wheat flour that puffs slightly as it cooks, and pressing the ball flat on the griddle traps the filling inside as it melts completely to liquid by the time the outside turns golden. Hotteok became especially tied to cold weather and winter markets because of how immediately warming the molten sugar filling is. Newer versions now use mixed nuts, sweet potato, and red bean paste, but the original brown sugar version is still what sells fastest on the coldest days. Hotteok is soft and sweet, and the next item carries a history that food historians still argue about. Kimbap and Japanese sushi rolls look nearly identical at first glance. Seaweed on the outside, rice in the middle, colorful fillings arranged in careful rows. But the rice is seasoned with sesame oil instead of vinegar. The fillings are cooked rather than raw, and many food historians argue the two traditions developed separately rather than one copying the other. Some accounts link kimbap to Japanese gimbap introduced during the colonial period, while others say rolled rice and seaweed existed in Korea before that contact. The dried seaweed sheet is toasted before rolling, which makes it stiff enough to hold the rice without tearing. Within minutes, the moisture from the warm rice softens it back into a chewy wrap. Kimbap became the definitive packed lunch and picnic food across South Korea, and convenience store chains eventually industrialized it into individually wrapped rolls sold in refrigerated cases around the clock. Today, tuna, spam, and kimchi are among the most popular fillings, and the format has spread far beyond Korea. Kimbap is neat and portable, but the next street food is the complete opposite. The tornado potato starts as a single whole unpeeled potato. A skewer is pushed straight through the center lengthwise, and then a rotating blade spirals around the outside in one continuous cut from top to bottom. The entire potato is still one connected piece when the vendor stretches the spiral out along the skewer into a long ribbon and drops it into the fryer. Records suggest this format appeared at Korean amusement parks and festivals in the early 2000s before spreading rapidly through street food markets. Viral food videos in the 2000s carried the visual format internationally, and tornado potato stalls appeared in markets across Asia, Europe, and North America shortly after. The seasoning options stretch from simple salt to cheese powder, squid ink, and barbecue, and vendors shake it on while the potato is still steaming. Now, here is the thing about the next item. The name in English sounds like a dessert, but what arrives on the paper plate is nothing like one. Korean sundae has absolutely nothing to do with ice cream. The name is a phonetic coincidence in English, and what it describes is a steamed sausage filled with glass noodles, vegetables, and pork blood packed inside a cleaned intestine casing. Records suggest stuffed sausage traditions have been part of Korean food culture for many centuries, with regional variations found across the peninsula. The glass noodles inside are made from sweet potato starch, which is why they stay translucent and slightly slippery even after steaming inside the dense casing. The combination creates a cross-section of contrasting textures, soft noodle and firm casing, that makes each slice distinctly different from a standard sausage. Sundae is typically served sliced on a paper plate with a dusting of chili powder and a small pile of coarse salt alongside tteokbokki at Pojangmacha stalls. Gwangjang Market in Seoul is considered one of the top destinations for the dish today. Sundae surprises people with what is inside, and the next item surprises people with what it is made from entirely. Byeondagi are small, brown oval shapes sold in paper cups at traditional markets, and the smell hits before the stall even comes into view. They are silkworm pupae. And the reason they exist as a street food is directly connected to the textile industry. When silk thread is unraveled from silkworm cocoons, the pupa left inside is a dense, protein-rich byproduct. Korean food culture turned that byproduct into a snack rather than discarding it. Many sources connect the practice to periods when affordable protein was scarce, particularly in rural silk-producing regions. The pupa is the stage between caterpillar and moth, and at this point, the silkworm has spun its full cocoon but not yet transformed, so the interior is dense and soft. Older generations in South Korea associate the distinctive smell of simmering byeondagi strongly with outdoor markets and childhood. Canned versions are available in grocery stores today, though younger generations eat it less frequently than older ones. Byeondagi is one of the boldest bites on any Korean street, and the next item looks far more approachable, but hides a cooking technique most people would not predict. Giranpang is a golden oblong loaf about the size of a hand and cracked into the center of the sweet bread batter before baking as a whole egg, yolk completely intact. The egg and the bread cook at the same time in the same small iron mold, and the result is a soft yolk sitting inside fully baked bread, which seems like it should not work. The reason it does is the batter itself. The slightly sweet milk bread dough acts as an insulator, slowing the heat that reaches the egg so the yolk stays runny at the center while the outside crust browns. Many sources link the molded bread format to Japanese taiyaki-style street breads that spread through Korea, with the sweet and savory egg combination becoming the Korean adaptation. Giranpang is a common winter breakfast eaten at train station markets and street stalls, often with a can of coffee from a nearby vending machine. It is warm, fast, and filling, which is exactly what a cold morning requires. The next item takes a completely different approach to heat. Dakkochi are grilled chicken skewers, but the technique separates them from every other skewered meat at the market. Most grilled foods get a coating of sauce applied once at the end. Korean chicken skewers are brushed with sauce repeatedly throughout the entire cooking process, and each layer chars slightly against the heat before the next coat goes on. The result is a lacquered crust built from multiple layers of caramelized glaze, and the dark patches on the surface are not burnt meat. They are layers of gochujang and sweet soy sauce that have caramelized and stacked up through repeated brushing over high flame. The technique became widespread through school-zone street stalls and evening markets near universities, where affordable grilled protein drew consistent lines of customers. Sweet soy and spicy gochujang are the two dominant flavor profiles today. and the best versions show clear grill marks beneath the glaze. The layered crust takes time and attention to build, and the next item costs more than almost anything else at a Korean street stall for a reason that is surprisingly direct. Hemmelpagen is a wide, flat pancake pressed to a golden crisp on a cast iron surface, and it is one of the most expensive items at a traditional Korean market. The reason is not technique. Fresh squid, shrimp, and oysters make up a large portion of the batter by weight, and the price of quality coastal seafood shifts with every season. Many Koreans associate the sound and smell of pageant frying with rainy days, and the connection between rain and craving pageant is a genuinely common cultural reference. Long green onion stalks are laid parallel across the full surface of the batter before cooking, so every slice contains a complete cross-section of scallion running from one edge of the pancake to the other. Donggrae Pajeon from Busan is one of the most celebrated regional versions, known for its particularly dense seafood layer. Today, Pajeon is sold at traditional markets and pojangmatcha stalls, cut into wedges and served with a soy vinegar dipping sauce. Pajeon is expensive because of what goes into it, and the next item is costly for the opposite reason, which is time. Yakwa looks like a simple amber-glazed cookie pressed into a flower pattern, and it is easy to assume the color comes from frying. But the frying is only the first half of the process. After the wheat dough is fried, each piece is submerged in a bath of honey and ginger syrup and left to soak for hours. The syrup works its way from the outside inward through the layered interior, which is why the center ends up just as deeply flavored as the surface. The dough gets that layered texture because it is mixed with sesame oil and rice wine before frying, which creates a slightly flaky structure that absorbs the syrup efficiently. Records suggest Yakwa dates to the Goryeo dynasty over 1,000 years ago. Bish originally prepared for royal ceremonies and Buddhist offerings. A viral moment on social media in the early 2020s brought a wave of younger Korean consumers back to traditional markets specifically to try it. Today, Yakwa is sold at specialty confectionery shops, Haenik villages, and traditional markets, and it is one of the most popular cultural gift items. The next item is cooked and eaten in seconds, but the technique behind it is more deliberate than it appears. Bunjeopang is a golden fish-shaped waffle, and it contains no fish at all. The carp shape comes entirely from the iron mold used to press and cook it, and many sources link that mold directly to the Japanese taiyaki pan introduced to Korea in the early 20th century. Koreans adapted the shape over time, developing their own sweeter batter and establishing sweetened red bean paste as the standard filling. The red bean paste is piped into the open mold before the top half is pressed shut, and the pressure of the two iron halves closing forces the batter into every fin, scale, and tail detail of the carp shape. The result is a crisp golden fish with a dense, sweet center, sold at winter street stalls nationwide. Modern versions use custard cream, sweet potato, and chocolate spread as alternative fillings alongside the traditional red bean. The fish shape is now so embedded in Korean winter culture that it appears on seasonal packaging, merchandise, and commercial branding far beyond the street food stall. Bunjeopang is shaped like one thing and made of another, saying the next item takes that idea to a stranger place by using a dough that is twisted before it ever hits the oil. Kwabaegi are twisted donuts dusted in cinnamon sugar, and the twist is not there for decoration. Twisting the rope of dough before frying stretches the gluten strands in two directions at once, which creates more resistance to the expanding bubbles of hot oil inside. The interior stays tighter and chewier than a straight donut made from the exact same dough would be. Many sources trace twisted fried dough variations to trade routes that carry deep frying techniques across East and Central Asia over many centuries. And the cinnamon sugar coating on the Korean version is a distinctly modern adaptation. Vendors roll and twist each piece by hand in full view of the customer before dropping it into the oil, so the entire process is visible from start to finish. Kwabaegi became a staple at school zone snack stalls and traditional markets, sold in batches while still hot. Today, the best versions have a tight spiral on the outside and a pillowy pull when torn apart. The twist changes what the dough becomes, and the final item changes what a street food even is because it is not cooked at the stall at all. Kimchi is sold at traditional market stalls in large open jars, scooped out by weight onto paper and handed over as a finished product. But finished is not quite the right word because kimchi is technically still changing at the moment of purchase. The bacteria inside the jar are alive and actively breaking down the cabbage, which means every batch is biologically different from the last and no two jars ever reach the same flavor. The cabbage leaves are packed tightly in earthenware jars and pressed under weight, which forces out water and creates an airless environment where lactic acid bacteria thrive and preserve the vegetable across weeks or months. Early versions of kimchi contained no chili at all, since chili peppers only arrived in Korea from the Americas in the 1500s or 1600s according to most accounts, and the fermented cabbage that existed before that looked and tasted completely different from what fills those jars today. The Korean diaspora carried kimchi to every continent, and dedicated kimchi refrigerators designed to hold precise fermentation temperatures became a standard home appliance in South Korea. Most people think Lebanese food is its own thing, but Syria, Palestine, and Jordan all cook from the same kitchen. The same hummus, the same tabbouleh, the same shawarma. What gets called Lebanese food in restaurants around the world is actually a shared Levantine tradition that 4 countries claim simultaneously. Lebanese diaspora communities carried Metzi culture across 3 continents from the late 1800s onward, landing in West Africa, Latin America, and Australia. Picture a table covered in 30 small plates, every inch taken, dishes stacked around dishes. That is mezza, and it was designed to feel like too much. Hummus, falafel, and shawarma are now global, but the country directly to the southwest barely shares a single dish with the Levant. Egypt does not look like its Arab neighbors on a plate. Beans and lentils run this kitchen, not lamb and rice. Records suggest a distinct food culture along the Nile going back thousands of years, built around whatever grew well in the floodplain. Egyptian workers moving to Gulf countries in the 20th century brought their staples with them. The dish that best captures this is koshari. Picture a bowl stacked with rice, lentils, pasta, and fried onions. 4 different starches layered on top of each other, finished with tomato sauce and vinegar. That combination exists nowhere else. Full madams, a slow-cooked fava bean dish eaten at breakfast, feeds millions of people every single morning. Head west along the North African coast and the food shifts again completely. The Maghreb includes Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. And its food has more in common with Berber and medieval Andalusian cooking than with anything from the Gulf. Berber communities were cooking across northwest Africa centuries before the Arab expansion arrived, and those flavors never left. Moroccan royal court cuisine crossed into southern Europe during centuries of Andalusian exchange and left marks that are still visible in Spanish and Portuguese cooking today. The defining cooking vessel here is the tagine, a sealed cone of clay where steam cycles inside and never escapes. The food essentially bastes itself. Couscous is eaten weekly across the entire region and now sits on supermarket shelves from London to Tokyo. Move east toward the peninsula, and the story of where Arab food itself began starts to take shape. Central Arabia, specifically the Najd Plateau in the interior of Saudi Arabia, is described in many accounts as the origin point of Arab food culture, and the food there is deliberately plain. In Bedouin tradition, elaborate spicing was historically seen as excess, something unnecessary. The national dish is kabsa, which is cooked in one enormous pot. Whole chickens or large cuts of mutton are buried into spiced rice, the pot big enough to feed a dozen people from a single vessel. Dates stuffed with butter or ghee are a daily food here, not a special occasion one. The coastal side of Saudi Arabia, though, tells a completely different story. Hijazi cuisine comes from the Red Sea coast, home to Makkah and Medina. For over 1,000 years, those 2 cities received pilgrims from every Muslim country on earth, and every group that came brought food knowledge with them. Hijazi cooking became one of the most globally blended cuisines in the Arab world long before anyone called it fusion. Records suggest centuries of influence from India, East Africa, and Southeast Asia, all arriving through the Hajj routes. The dish selig is rice cooked directly in white broth until every drop absorbs into the grain, producing something closer to a dense porridge than any other rice dish in the Gulf. Mandi, slow pit-roasted meat layered over rice, has since spread to become a restaurant format across the entire Arab world. Cross the Red Sea, and the cuisine shifts into a coffee origin story that still does not have a settled answer. Yemen is one of the strongest candidates for where coffee culture began, and that trade history shaped everything about its food. Some accounts say coffee moved from Ethiopia to Yemen, and cultivation started there. Others say it developed in both places at roughly the same time. Either way, Yemeni merchants were moving spices through Indian Ocean routes long before European traders appeared in those waters. Bint al-San is a Yemeni bread made from paper-thin layers stacked in rings and soaked in honey and butter after baking. It tears apart in sheets. Salta, a stew built around fenugreek froth, has dedicated restaurant followings in Gulf cities. Head north and the food gets wealthier and considerably stranger. Gulf cuisine, covering Kuwait, the UAE, Bahrain, and Qatar, is the most heavily spiced in the Arab world. But most of those spices, including cinnamon, cardamom, and dried limes, did not come from within the Arab world at all. Maritime trade routes with India and Persia shaped the Gulf spice profile over centuries. Pearl diving wealth in the 1800s and early 1900s brought South Asian cooks directly into Gulf households, and their techniques stayed. The ingredient that captures all of this most clearly is lumi, a whole lime that has been dried until it rattles like an empty shell. The drying process creates a fermented sourness that fresh lime simply cannot produce. Mahbouz, spiced rice with meat or fish built around this flavor profile, appears on almost every Gulf home table. One ingredient that the entire kitchen runs on comes from a tree that can live more than 100 years. The date palm may be the single most important food plant across all of Arab food culture. It produces fruit only once per year, but a single mature tree can yield hundreds of pounds in one harvest. Many sources trace cultivation back at least 7,000 years to the Persian Gulf and Mesopotamia. The fruit travels through three distinct stages. Kalal is the crunchy yellow stage. Rutab is soft and caramel-like. Tamar is the dried, concentrated version most people outside the region recognize. Each stage is eaten differently depending on where you are. Dates open the fast during Ramadan for hundreds of millions of people. The medjool variety became a specialty export crop sold worldwide. Another plant carries a similar pan-Arab story, but this one grows underground and its food culture predates almost everything else on this list. Iraq sits between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the land where agriculture is widely believed to have started. Some accounts describe Babylonian clay tablets as among the earliest written records of cooking that exist anywhere. Iraqi food still carries techniques that predate formal recipes by thousands of years. Iraqi Jewish diaspora communities moved their distinct food traditions to Palestine, India, and the United Kingdom in the 20th century, carrying that ancient lineage with them. The most striking dish is masgouf, a whole freshwater carp split open down the middle, staked flat against a wooden poles around an open fire. It stands upright and cooks from the radiant heat of the embers, never touching the flame directly. Kleisha date-filled pastry cookies are made in large batches for Eid and are considered the national cookie of Iraq. From the oldest food culture, the next stop is one of the most internationally overlooked. Oman has one of the most complex flavor profiles in the Arab world, yet its cuisine is among the least exported. The Omani Maritime Empire once controlled sections of the East African coast and the Swahili shoreline, and that reach shaped what ended up in Omani kitchens. Rice cooking methods, spice blends, and dried fish techniques moved back and forth across the Indian Ocean for centuries. The dish shua involves wrapping meat in banana or palm leaves, sealing it inside an underground clay pot, and burying the entire thing in a sandpit fire for up to 48 hours. That is the longest slow cook of any recognized dish in the Arab world. Omani halwa, a dense gelatinous sweet made with rosewater and saffron, is served at every formal gathering and functions as a cultural marker the way a national symbol would. Saffron is in that halwa because of trade, and saffron has its own story about cost. Saffron is the most expensive spice by weight used across Arab cooking, and the reason is simple. Each strand has to be hand-picked from a single crocus flower that blooms for roughly 1 week per year. Records suggest the spice originated in the broader Khorasan region and has been used in Persian and Arab cooking for at least 1,000 years. Every crocus produces exactly 3 stigmas, the red threads that become saffron, and they have to be removed by hand within hours of the flower opening. The spice moved west through Arab trade routes into Moroccan and Andalusian kitchens, and east through Omani networks into Zanzibar. A single flower's harvest can end up in a Gulf rice dish, a Moroccan tagine, and a Levantine dessert, sometimes on 3 different continents at once. Another trade-carried flavor works through a completely different process, one that takes days instead of a week of harvest. Before refrigeration existed, Arab kitchens across the Levant and North Africa built preservation systems that kept food edible for months. Those preserved flavors became so appealing that the techniques outlasted their original purpose. Kishk is made by mixing cracked wheat with yogurt, letting the mixture ferment for several days, then spreading it flat in the sun to dry into a rough, crumbled powder. Medieval Arab food texts record versions of this process, meaning people figured this out a very long time ago. Diaspora communities carried these traditions worldwide, and a revival of interest in fermented Arab foods is now visible in restaurant culture internationally. The bright pink pickled turnips on Arab mezzi tables get that color from beet juice added to the brine. Preserved lemons and fermented yogurt drinks show up across Arab restaurant menus from London to Dubai. One preserved product started as a way to manage surplus and became something entirely different. Sudan is left out of most conversations about Arab food, but it holds full membership in the Arab League and has one of the most distinct food identities on this list. Its kitchen sits at the crossing point of Arab culture, Nubian tradition, and East African food practice simultaneously, and all 3 are visible on the plate. Sudanese diaspora communities have built distinct restaurant presences in Cairo, London, and Gulf cities. Asida is a stiff fermented sorghum dough cooked until it forms a smooth, dense mound in the pot. It is eaten by tearing pieces directly and dipping, no utensils involved. Kisra, a thin fermented flatbread made from sorghum, looks structurally similar to the Ethiopian injera, but uses a different grain and pairs with an entirely different set of stews. The most visually striking Arab dish, though, comes from the cuisine most people assume is the simplest. Mauritania sits at the western edge of the Arab world, deep in the Sahara, and its food culture shares almost nothing with the Levant or the Gulf. Camel milk is a daily staple here. Whole roasted camel is a real dish for large celebrations. The food tradition is shaped by Saharan Berber and Moorish nomadic practices going back centuries. Mauritanian food has almost no international restaurant presence, making it one of the least globally visible Arab cuisines despite the country joining the Arab League in 1973. The most popular dish is tieboudienne, rice, and fish cooked together with vegetables in a single large pot, which originally crossed into Mauritania from Senegal. The most popular dish in one of the Arab world's member states is West African in origin. Zrig, camel milk mixed with water and dates, remains a daily drink in nomadic communities across the country. The Arab world stretches from this desert edge all the way back to the Mediterranean coast, and almost none of it tastes the same. Pocky is one of those snacks that looks almost too simple to be interesting, but the design is more calculated than most people realize. That bare tip at the bottom, the part with no chocolate, was not an accident and not decoration. It was engineered specifically so your fingers never touch the coating. One clean grip point, no mess, and suddenly sharing a snack between two people becomes natural. Records commonly point to Glico in Osaka in the mid-1960s as the origin, and from there it spread first across Asia, then globally, carried largely by anime culture and school lunch bags. Today, it is sold in over 30 countries, and November 11th became Pocky Day in Japan because the date on a calendar looks like four sticks lined up side by side. Simple idea. Global reach. But the next one fooled almost everyone about which country invented it. Haichu looks American. It feels American. It shows up in US stadiums and gas stations, and most people who eat it have no idea it came out of Japan in the 1970s. Here's the part that actually makes sense once you hear it. In Japan, spitting out gum in public is considered rude, so Morinaga Confectionery set out to make something that chewed like fruit gum, but was meant to be swallowed. The result was Haichu, a candy with a thin outer shell and a dense fruity center, two textures working together on purpose. It spread first through Asian diaspora communities, then exploded in North America, partly because Japanese baseball players were seen chewing it in dugouts and fans started asking what it was. Now it sits next to American candy in mainstream stores. Japanese candy redefined chewy, but the next item redefined what rice can even be. Most people think rice crackers are one thing. They are not. Senbei is made from regular cooked rice that gets shaped and dried. Arari comes from sticky rice that is pounded into a dense paste before it is formed. The textures are completely different, the regional histories are different, and calling them the same snack is like calling white bread and sourdough the same thing. Senbei records trace back to central Japan, possibly as far back as the 8th century, and Arare is closely tied to Kyoto and Osaka. They spread through Japan along temple districts and merchant routes long before any export market existed. Some varieties are still flame-toasted one by one with soy glaze brushed on between each pass over the heat. Today, they are in every convenience store across Japan and on airlines throughout Asia. A snack that old surviving this long is already impressive, but the next one barely made it through its own creation. Apollo from Meiji looks like a tiny rocket nose cone, and that shape is not just cute, it is deliberate flavor engineering. The strawberry coating sits at the pointed tip, so the first thing you taste is fruit, and as you eat down toward the base, you transition into milk chocolate. The flavor changes as you go. Meiji launched it in 1969, the same year as the Apollo moon landing, and the name stuck. It became a childhood staple that was never significantly reformulated, which is rare. The tiny pink cones stacked in rows inside the box became one of the most recognized shapes in Japanese candy. Today, gift boxes of Apollo are sold at airports across Japan, and the unboxing videos rack up millions of views. Apollo is all about shape. The next one is entirely about sound. Umaibo is a hollow corn puff cylinder that has cost 10 yen, roughly 7 cents since 1979, and that price has never changed. That fact alone made it famous outside snack culture. Economists and business writers have studied it as one of the clearest examples of a company committing to a price point and holding it through decades of inflation. Rizka introduced it with one flavor, and it eventually grew to over 20, including takoyaki, cheese, and salami. The snack snaps when you bite it with a clean, airy crunch because the inside is hollow. It is in every konbini across Japan and has made its way to specialty Asian grocery stores internationally. Collectors seek out limited and vintage packaging. The price never moved, but the next snack changed its entire identity. Ramoon candy is fizzy, pastel, and dissolves on your tongue in a way that feels almost carbonated. And the reason for that is that it was always supposed to be a drink. Ramoon is a Japanese soda that traces back to the Kobe area in the late 1800s, when a British-style lemonade recipe arrived with foreign traders and Japan took it and rebuilt it completely, including the famous marble-sealed bottle. The tablet candy came later as a portable version of that summer festival flavor. The small round tablets come in soft colors and effervesce lightly when they hit your tongue. Today they are sold at festival stalls, tourist shops, and in novelty candy aisles around the world. Japan absorbed a foreign recipe and turned it into something entirely its own. The next item is the opposite story entirely. The pretz came first. Most people do not know that. Before Pocky became the global chocolate-dipped icon, there was pretz, a flat rectangular biscuit stick with savory seasoning baked right into the surface. Glico made it in the early 1960s, and many food historians describe it as the foundation product that the company then developed into Pocky by adding chocolate. Pretz stayed savory while Pocky went sweet, and Pocky won the export market. But pretz never disappeared. In Japan, it is still widely sold in flavors like tomato, roast chicken, and salad, and the seasoning flecks on the surface are visible. It just never got the global fame its younger sibling did. Pretz stayed savory. The next one went in a completely different direction. Morinaga milk caramel is over 100 years old, and the box looks almost exactly the same as it did at the start. Small yellow packaging, gold foil-wrapped squares, matte surface on the caramel itself. Records suggest Morinaga introduced it around 1913, and early marketing positioned it partly as a nutritious product, which sounds strange now, but made sense in a period when Western-style confections were new and needed justification. The taste was adapted for Japanese preference, meaning less sweet than European caramel. During certain early decades, it was distributed through schools and included in rations. Now it is a nostalgia item, sold in old-style sweet shops and given as a gift by people who remember eating it as children. The box barely changed. The next one is young and pink and became one of Japan's biggest snack exports. Yan Yan looks like a toy before it looks like food. You get a cup of biscuit sticks on one side and a dip of chocolate or strawberry cream on the other, and the sticks have small stamped animals and fortune messages pressed into them. Here is what most people miss. The dipping format was not designed to be playful. It was designed so children would not get their fingers coated in chocolate. The activity became the selling point later. Meiji launched it in 1979, and it spread quickly through Southeast Asia, where it became so popular that in some markets it is more recognized than it is in Japan itself. Today, it is in Asian grocery stores across the US and is a nostalgia product for the diaspora. Yan Yan made dipping into a ritual. The next one made a cast iron pan into an art form. Taiyaki is a fish-shaped waffle, and the fish is not random. In Japan, sea bream is called tai, and sea bream is a celebratory fish connected to good fortune and special occasions. Shaping a street snack like a fish meant that eating one felt like a small blessing, an everyday luxury borrowed from the language of celebration. Records commonly suggest it originated in the Tokyo area around 1909, cooked in a heavy cast iron mold that presses shut over the batter. The batter fills every fin and the tail, and when you split one open, you see either red bean paste or thick custard inside. It stayed domestic for a long time until the global popularity of similar Korean fish pastries brought international attention to the format. The ice cream cone version went viral in the US in the late 2000s. Taiyaki is luck-shaped in pastry. The next one built its reputation on heat, except that heat might be a lie. Most wasabi peas you have eaten probably did not contain real wasabi. Outside Japan, the green coating is almost always made from horseradish and food coloring. Real wasabi is one of the most difficult crops to grow commercially anywhere in the world. It needs cold, clean running water flowing over its roots constantly. It grows slowly, and it commonly takes close to 2 years before a single plant is ready to harvest. The root looks like a knobbly green rhizome, almost alien. The pea snack was developed largely for export, and the dried pea with its pale green shell became a staple bar snack and airline snack globally, without most consumers ever knowing the heat was borrowed from a different plant entirely. Real wasabi versions exist, but stay in the expensive niche category. The next item hides something more complex under a soft, sweet surface. Mochi is one of the most beloved foods in Japan, and it is also every year associated with more choking incidents than almost any other food in the country. That tension is not hidden, it is known and accepted. The sticky white rice paste stretches when you pull it rather than tearing cleanly, and that elasticity is exactly what makes it dangerous if eaten too fast. Records trace mochi back over 1,000 years, traditionally made by pounding sticky rice in a large wooden mortar at New Year celebrations. It spread to Japanese American communities and then exploded globally when California companies popularized the ice cream mochi format. Now it is in mainstream grocery chains across the US. The premium version, called daifuku, is dusted with cornstarch or potato starch to keep it from sticking to everything it touches. Mochi almost never changes. The next snack changes constantly, and that is exactly the point. Japan has produced over 300 Kit Kat flavors. That number sounds made up, but it is not. The reason it happened starts with language. Kit Kat in Japanese sounds close to Kitokatsu, which roughly translates as "you will surely win." That sound similarity turned a British chocolate bar into a good luck gift. Students started receiving them before exams. Kit Kat went from imported candy to cultural ritual. Nestlé Japan then leaned into regional flavors: matcha, sake, sweet potato, strawberry cheesecake, wasabi, and dozens of seasonal and location-specific variants. Its many sold only at certain airports or train stations. The bar structure stays the same, but white chocolate, dark chocolate, and cream-filled varieties completely change the color and feel of the product. Japan-exclusive flavors are now collected and traded internationally. Kit Kat became Japanese through a coincidence of pronunciation. The next two came from the ground itself. Dried natto snacks exist because regular natto is one of the most polarizing foods in Japan. Natto is fermented soybeans, famously stringy, sticky, and strong-smelling, and it is so tied to northeastern Japan that many people in the western part of the country will not go near it. The dried version removes the strings, removes most of the smell, and compresses the flavor into small brown cubes with a matte powdery surface from the drying process. There is still a faint fermented note when you open the bag. It is essentially natto made accessible to the people who spent years refusing it. The fermentation technique traces back to the Tohoku region, possibly centuries ago, while the cracker form is a modern product. It sits in health food sections and specialty stores, quietly making converts out of people who thought they had already decided. Tacos al pastor look like they belong on a Mexico City street corner, and they do. But the spinning vertical spit they cook on came from somewhere else entirely. Lebanese immigrants brought the shawarma spit to Mexico in the early to mid-20th century, and local cooks adapted it with dried chilies, achiote, and a whole pineapple wedged on top of the meat cone. That pineapple is not decoration. As the spit turns, juice drips slowly down the entire stack while it cooks, basting the meat continuously without anyone touching it. Today, al pastor is on taqueria menus worldwide and at late-night food stalls from Mexico City to Los Angeles. But al pastor uses a technique borrowed from the Middle East. The next dish uses a technique so old it predates metal cookware entirely. Tamales may be among the oldest prepared foods in the Americas still eaten in their original form. Records suggest they were carried as portable travel and field food for thousands of years before any modern cuisine existed. The corn husk wrapped around the outside is not presentation, it is the cooking vessel. Masa dough is spread directly onto the dried husk, filled, folded, and then steamed in that same husk until the dough sets around the filling. The husk gives the interior a faint, earthy scent that does not come from the dough itself. Tamale traditions spread across Latin America through trade and migration, producing dozens of regional versions with different fillings, wrappings, and sizes. Today, tamales appear at holiday tables across the continent, on street carts, and on growing numbers of restaurant menus in the US and Europe. Tamales are wrapped and steamed. The next dish skips the wrapper and puts the chile directly into the dough. The word enchilada does not mean a burrito with sauce on top. The defining step happens before the filling goes in. The tortilla is dipped into hot chili sauce first, which softens the corn and pushes the chili flavor directly into the dough itself. Most versions served outside Mexico skip this step entirely, which is why the result tastes fundamentally different. Records suggest this preparation appeared in central Mexico during the early Spanish colonial period as an already established local method. When the dipping step is done correctly, the tortilla comes out a deep brick red or dark brown before any filling touches it. Today, enchiladas are on Mexican restaurant menus globally and at regional festivals throughout Latin America. Enchiladas go into the oven. The next dish never sees dry heat at all. Caldo tlalpeño looks like a simple chicken broth from the outside, but there is one object sitting on top that changes everything. A single whole chipotle chile, dark and wrinkled, is dropped into the golden broth among chickpeas and shredded chicken at the moment of serving. It does not dissolve right away. It floats, slowly releasing smoke and heat into the liquid from the inside as the person eats. Records suggest the dish takes its name from Tlalpan, a neighborhood on the outskirts of Mexico City where it developed as a market worker's morning meal. Mexico City food culture spread it across the country, and it remains one of the most recognized regional broths in Mexican cooking. Today, it anchors traditional restaurant menus and home cooking across Mexico, especially in colder months. One chile, one bowl. The next dish builds a sauce from 30 ingredients and still has to wait for the right season to finish it. Mole Negro can contain more than 30 ingredients, and chocolate is near the bottom of that list. It is not there to make the sauce sweet. It is one of the last things added, used to round and deepen a sauce already built from dried chilies, charred tortillas, nuts, seeds, and spices. Both Oaxaca and Puebla have strong historical claims to mole, and some accounts link specific regional versions to each state going back centuries. The sauce gets its near-black color from chilies toasted until dark and then ground in, and from blackened tortillas that add both color and body. Mole Negro is a celebration dish served at special occasions and holidays throughout Mexico, and it anchors fine Mexican restaurant menus globally. Mole takes days. The next dish was designed to be read at a glance. Chiles en nogada carries the colors of the Mexican flag on the plate. The green poblano chile, the white walnut cream sauce poured over it, and the red pomegranate seeds scattered across the top correspond directly to the flag. Many sources say the dish was created in Puebla in the early 19th century to celebrate Mexican independence, with some accounts crediting nuns with the original recipe. The dish exists for exactly one window each year when fresh walnuts and pomegranates overlap in late summer and early autumn. The walnut cream must be made from fresh nuts while they are still soft and milky, giving the sauce a pale, almost white color that darkens quickly if the nuts age past that window. Today it appears as a seasonal special across Mexico each August and September. It is seasonal by necessity. The next dish is built around a transformation that happens before any cooking begins. Pozole is built around hominy, and hominy is not the same thing as dried corn. It is corn that has been soaked in an alkaline solution traditionally made from wood ash or lime, until the outer skin splits and each kernel swells to 2 or 3 times its original size. Without that process, the corn would stay hard, would not absorb broth, and would never reach the texture that defines the dish. Records suggest pozole was a significant ceremonial food in pre-colonial Mesoamerica before becoming a widely eaten everyday preparation. The swollen kernels open at one end during cooking, splitting into a pale flower shape that blooms slowly in the broth. Red, white, and green versions vary by region across Mexico. Today, pozole anchors weekend meals, family gatherings, and a whole category of dedicated pozole restaurants. The next dish transforms a whole animal using earth and fire. Barbacoa is a cooking method, not a seasoning. The word itself is the root of the English word barbecue, though the two preparations share almost nothing today. Records suggest earth pit cooking traditions existed across central Mexico and parts of the Caribbean long before Spanish contact, and the method was widely documented in Mesoamerican cultures. In traditional preparations, maguey leaves line the pit and wrap the meat, giving the exterior a faint char and transferring a subtle vegetal bitterness to the drippings that collect below the cooking vessel. That liquid is often served as a broth alongside the shredded meat. Mexican migration to the U.S. brought barbacoa tacos to a much wider audience. Today, barbacoa taco stands open before dawn across Mexico, particularly on weekends, because the pit timing requires overnight cooking. Barbacoa is ancient pit cooking. The next dish takes the same underground patience and applies it to something far smaller. Cochinita pibil is cooked underground. The pib is a pit dug in the earth, lined with stones heated until they hold significant thermal mass, and the meat, wrapped tightly in banana leaves, is lowered in and covered completely. The ground itself acts as the oven, holding heat evenly around the package for hours. Records suggest this pit cooking method predates Spanish contact in the Yucatan Peninsula, and the dish was adapted over time as achiote and citrus arrived through later trade. Achiote paste, ground from annatto seeds, is rubbed into the pork before wrapping and stains it a deep brick orange. That color deepens further as the meat steams inside the sealed leaves. So when the package is finally opened, the pork is vivid reddish orange all the way through. Today, cochinita pibil is on Yucatecan restaurant menus worldwide. The next dish starts with something that grows inside the plant itself. Huitlacoche is a fungus that colonizes corn kernels from the inside. Where there was a yellow kernel, the fungus replaces the starch with its own mass, swelling the kernel into a bulging blue-black growth several times its original size. In most agricultural contexts worldwide, this is crop damage and the affected ears are discarded. In Mexico, records suggest huitlacoche was used as a food source in pre-colonial times and has remained a prized seasonal ingredient ever since. A cob with huitlacoche looks like it erupted, with dark, irregular masses pushing out between the husks. The flavor is deeply earthy and smoky in a way that has no close comparison to anything else. It appears in quesadillas, soups, and crepe fillings at Mexican markets and restaurants, and some chefs in the US and Europe have introduced it to fine dining menus. The next dish is built from the part of the plant that stores water for drought. Nopal cactus pads are more than 90% water, and that single fact is the central challenge of cooking with them. When a pad is cut and the spines are removed, the edges immediately release a thick, clear gel, almost identical in appearance to aloe vera. That gel cooks off with heat, but dishes that do not account for it end up watery and texturally wrong. Managing the liquid that comes out of the nopal as it cooks is considered the core skill in preparing it well. Records suggest nopal cactus has been cultivated and eaten in Mexico for thousands of years, and the plant spread to Mediterranean Europe, North Africa, and parts of Asia through post-contact trade, though culinary use of the pads stayed concentrated in Latin America. Today, nopals appear in breakfast dishes, salads, tacos, and soups across Mexico. The next dish is built on a base that most tortilla makers would consider a mistake. A tlayuda starts with a large corn tortilla cooked past the point where most cooks would pull it from the heat. The goal is a rigid, partially crisped base with patches of char, not a soft, pliable wrap. That crispness is not a defect, it is the point. A finished tlayuda can be 30 to 40 centimeters across, charred in irregular patches from the comal, spread with black bean paste, and loaded with tasajo or other toppings before being folded in half to carry and eat. Records suggest the tlayuda developed as an everyday street food in Oaxaca long before it became internationally associated with the region's cuisine. The global rise of Oaxacan food through travel media in the 2000s brought it to restaurant menus outside Mexico. Tlayuda is built on a crisped base. The next dish is built on something so rare the supply barely keeps up with demand. Escamoles are the larvae and pupae of a large ant species that builds its colonies in the root systems of agave plants underground. Harvesting them means locating an active colony, digging down, and carefully extracting the larvae by hand from tunnels that can run a meter or more below the surface. Each larva is roughly the size of a grain of rice, pale and almost translucent before cooking. Supply is consistently limited by how physically demanding and time-consuming that process is, which is why they sometimes draw comparisons to caviar in terms of price per serving. Records suggest pre-colonial Mesoamerican cultures used Eskimos as a seasonal food source during spring, when colonies are most active. They remain almost entirely regional and seasonal, with short shelf life making broader distribution difficult. Today, Eskimos appear at upscale Mexican restaurants in Mexico City and internationally. The next ingredient is abundant, inexpensive, and has a longer market history in Oaxaca than beef does anywhere in Mexico. Chapulines are grasshoppers, and in Oaxaca, they are not a novelty or a challenge food. They are a documented, everyday protein source. Market stalls in Oaxaca have sold toasted, seasoned grasshoppers as a snack and taco filling for generations, without ceremony, alongside produce and cheese. Records suggest chapulines have been harvested and eaten in southern Mexico since pre-colonial times. In a dry pan or on a comal, they shrink to about a third of their live size and turn a reddish brown as moisture cooks out, becoming completely crisp and light. The result is closer in texture to a cracker than to anything requiring hesitation. Today, chapulines are at Oaxacan market stalls, in taco fillings, on restaurant snack menus, and at food festivals globally. The next dish turned one coastal ingredient into a tradition completely separate from the one it is usually confused with. Mexican ceviche served in a tall glass is not the same dish as Peruvian ceviche, and the two traditions developed independently along different coastlines. The Mexican coastal version uses tomato, cucumber, avocado, and shrimp in a style closer to a cold seafood cocktail than a lime-cured fish preparation. Records suggest this cocktail-style seafood tradition developed along Pacific Coast states, including Sinaloa and Nayarit, is where the tall glass format became the signature presentation. The mixture arrives showing visible layers through the glass, orange broth at the bottom, pink shrimp, green avocado, and white onion above, with a flat tostada leaning against the rim for scooping. Coastal trade and internal migration carried it to cities across Mexico. Today, it anchors Marisco's restaurants and seafood stalls throughout the country. Ceviche is cold and coastal. The next dish comes from an entirely different climate. Birria is a bowl of stew. That is the original dish. It is slow-braised meat, traditionally goat, cooked for hours in a broth built from dried chilies and spices until the meat pulls completely apart and the consommé turns a deep, complex red. The consommé is the main event, not the taco wrapped around it. The quesabirria taco, where a tortilla is dipped into the fat layer floating on the consommé and griddled with cheese until the exterior crisps and turns orange-red, is a recent format that emerged in the U.S. market and spread back through social media in the late 2000s. Records suggest birria originated in Jalisco as a method for making goat meat tender through long, slow heat. Today, birria bowls and the viral taco format both appear at Mexican restaurants and street stalls globally. Birria is a braise. The next dish is technically a ferment, and the main ingredient is the part of the fruit everyone throws away. Tepache is made from pineapple rinds and cores, not the flesh, the parts that go in the bin. They are combined with raw sugar and water and left at room temperature, and the wild yeast already living on the skin of the pineapple does the rest. So within 1 to 3 days, white foam builds on the surface as the yeast consumes the sugar and the liquid turns a cloudy golden amber with a faintly sour smell. The pineapple flesh is never part of it. Records suggest pre-colonial Mexico had fermented beverages made from corn, and the pineapple version developed after the fruit became widely available through later trade. Tepache stayed a street food and home preparation for generations before craft beverage culture adopted it internationally. Canned and bottled versions now reach international markets. Tepache ferments in days. The next item takes years to grow and roasts for days before any fermentation can begin. The agave plant used to make mezcal takes anywhere from 7 to 30 years to reach maturity depending on the variety, and it dies in the process of producing the single batch of sugary material used for distillation. The plant lives its entire life for one harvest. When it is ready, the leaves are stripped away to reveal the core, called a piña, because it resembles a giant pineapple which can weigh up to 50 kilograms. Those cores are split and loaded into stone-lined earth pits, where they roast over smoldering wood for several days. The smoky character associated with mezcal comes entirely from that roasting stage in the ground, not from distillation itself. Records suggest distillation of agave spirits developed after Spanish contact introduced the technology to existing fermented agave traditions. Today, mezcal appears on pairing menus alongside Oaxacan food and at mezcalerias across Mexico and internationally. The next dish has been going continuously for longer than most restaurants have existed. The torta ahogada means drowned sandwich, and the name is completely literal. A birote salado, a specific bread roll developed in Guadalajara with a crust firm enough to resist collapse, is submerged entirely in a thin, very spicy chili broth until the outside softens while the interior stays intact. The structural integrity of that specific roll is what makes the dish possible. A softer roll would disintegrate. The finished torta is completely orange-red on the exterior, with the bread visible only as a shape beneath the broth, served in a deep bowl with the liquid reaching the rim. Records suggest the torta ahogada has been a Guadalajara street food for well over a century. With some accounts saying it began as a dropped sandwich a vendor chose to serve anyway. The dish remains deeply tied to Guadalajara as a point of regional pride, and the specific bread is difficult to replicate outside the city. The last dish on this list has been running without interruption for longer than anyone can fully verify. Mole madre is not a recipe. It is a pot that never empties. In a small number of traditional Oaxacan restaurants and family kitchens, a mole is started and then maintained continuously across time. Each day a portion is used and new ingredients are added to what remains. The pot is never fully replaced or emptied. Some accounts describe mole madre preparations that have been continuously active for decades, meaning the sauce served today contains material from batches made years or even generations earlier. The pot itself becomes a living record. A mole madre is darker and more viscous than any freshly made mole, with a depth of color built from accumulated layers of charred chile, chocolate, and spice that no single batch could ever produce. Records of this practice are tied to specific multi-generational restaurant and family traditions in Oaxaca. Today, it is referenced in culinary heritage discussions as one of the most philosophically unusual preparations in any food culture on Earth. Sushi was not originally about eating raw fish with rice. The oldest form was a preservation technique where fish was packed in fermented rice for months, the rice doing the work of curing the fish slowly, and then the rice was discarded and only the fish was eaten. The version where both are eaten together is a relatively recent Tokyo invention. Records trace the fermented form to Southeast Asian riverfish preservation techniques that arrived in Japan centuries earlier. Picture a chef pressing a single piece of nigiri between two hands, fish laid directly on warm rice shaped in seconds, no plate, no ceremony, handed across a counter. The conveyor belt sushi restaurant was invented in Osaka in the 1950s by a man who reportedly got the idea watching beer bottles move along a factory line. It now serves more sushi globally than any other format, but the fish that defines the highest end of sushi culture has its own story that is stranger than the dish itself. Ramen is not Japanese in origin. It is a direct descendant of Chinese wheat noodle soup, brought to Japan by Chinese immigrants in port cities like Yokohama and Kobe in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Japan then transformed it so completely over the following century that it became a defining symbol of Japanese national identity, and the Chinese origin is almost never mentioned. Instant ramen was invented in 1958 by Momofuku Ando and is now one of the most eaten foods on Earth. Picture a bowl of tonkotsu, the surface covered entirely by a layer of rendered pork fat, the noodles barely visible below it. A single slice of chashu pork with its edge curling up from the heat. Japan has a dedicated ramen museum in Yokohama. Each region, Sapporo, Fukuoka, Tokyo, Kyoto, has a completely distinct broth style that locals consider non-negotiable. Two ramen shops on the same street can taste like different cuisines. Ramen spread through Japan by train and migration, but one ingredient in the broth of the most extreme version took decades to perfect and is still debated. Tempura is not Japanese. It was introduced by Portuguese missionaries and traders in the 1500s who fried vegetables in batter during Catholic fasting periods called Quatuor Ani Tempora. The name tempura likely comes directly from the Latin name for those fasting days. Japan then refined the batter to a lightness that no other cuisine has matched. Picture a single prawn in mid-fry, the batter erupting into irregular white frills in clear hot oil, the shape completely unpredictable. High-end tempura restaurants in Tokyo hold Michelin stars. The batter is made with ice-cold water and barely mixed, lumps left in intentionally, because overmixing collapses the texture. Portugal gave Japan tempura, but Japan gave the world something that took centuries of deliberate isolation to develop. Kaiseki, Japan's most formal multi-course meal, began as a warm stone. Zen Buddhist monks placed a heated stone inside their robes against their stomachs during long fasting meditation sessions to suppress hunger. The meal that eventually replaced the stone took the same name. Kaiseki means warm stone in the belly. Records trace it to Kyoto tea ceremony culture and Zen Buddhist temple practice, evolving into formal court cuisine over several centuries. Picture a single ceramic dish with three small components placed at asymmetric angles, negative space covering most of the plate, no garnish, nothing decorative. Kyoto has more kaiseki restaurants per capita than any other city in Japan. A full meal can have 12 or more courses and takes 3 to 4 hours. The presentation follows seasonal rules strict enough that using a winter ceramic in summer is considered a formal error. Kyoto built its food identity on restraint. Osaka, 1 hour away by train, built its identity on the exact opposite. Osaka has a saying, "Kuida ore," which translates roughly as "ruin yourself by eating," and it is used as a point of civic pride. Takoyaki, octopus cooked inside a round ball of batter in a special iron mold, and okonomiyaki, a savory pancake whose name means grill what you like, are the two dishes that carry the city's self-image. Takoyaki was invented in Osaka in the 1930s by a street vendor named Tomokichi Endo. Picture the iron pan with its rows of hemispheres, batter poured over, a thin pick turning each ball as the edges crisp and seal over the octopus chunk inside. Hiroshima's version of okonomiyaki layers the ingredients rather than mixing them, and adds noodles inside the batter, which Osaka considers incorrect. The argument between cities about the correct way to make it has been ongoing for decades. Street food defined Osaka, but the north of Japan built its food identity on surviving winter. Miso soup looks like one dish and is actually dozens. The paste ranges from white and sweet in Kyoto to dark, almost black, and intensely salty in Nagoya. Each region considers its own version the correct one, and the differences are not subtle. Fermented soybean paste traditions arrived in Japan from China and Korea over 1,000 years ago and became a daily staple by the medieval period. Picture a hacho miso brick next to a shiro miso block. Both the same size, one nearly black and dense enough to slice, the other pale yellow and soft. Nagoya's hacho miso is aged in cedar barrels under heavy stone weights for at least 2 years. It looks nothing like the powder dissolved in instant miso packets sold globally. The instant version outsells fresh miso preparation in many countries. Miso is the quiet backbone of Japanese cooking, but the ingredient that makes the broth underneath it has a biology unlike almost anything else in food. Katsuobushi, the dried fermented fish flakes used to make dashi broth, is considered one of the hardest food products in the world. A finished block has to be shaved with a specialized wooden plane, the same tool used to shave wood to produce the translucent flakes used in cooking. The fish is smoked, dried, and fermented over several months until it reaches a hardness comparable to dense wood. The primary production center is Makurazaki in Kagoshima in southern Japan. Picture a katsuobushi block mounted in its wooden box plane, thin shavings curling off with each slow stroke, pale and almost see-through. When fresh shavings are placed near heat, they move as if alive, waving slowly from the rising warm air. This movement appears on top of takoyaki and okonomiyaki at street stalls across Japan. It is purely physical, caused by heat, but it became one of the most recognized visual signatures of Japanese street food. Dashi is invisible in the finished dish, but the next ingredient is the opposite, engineered entirely for how it looks and where it comes from. Almost all of the wasabi served outside Japan, and a significant portion inside Japan, is not wasabi. It is European horseradish mixed with mustard powder and green food coloring. Real wasabi is a semi-aquatic plant that grows in cold mountain stream beds, takes up to 2 years to mature, and must be grated immediately before serving because the heat compounds begin to fade within 15 minutes of grating. Records trace cultivation in mountain stream beds to at least the early 1600s in Shizuoka. Picture a wasabi rhizome being grated in slow circular strokes on a sharkskin paddle. Pale green paste forming at the center of the motion. Real wasabi heat is brief and clears from the nasal passages within seconds. The horseradish substitute burns longer and harder. Most people who believe they have tasted wasabi have tasted something else. Real wasabi is almost impossible to farm at scale, but the next ingredient is even harder to produce and even easier to fake. The marbling in Wagyu beef is not fat distributed around the muscle. It is fat that has grown between individual muscle fibers as an intramuscular structure, which is genetically specific to a small number of Japanese cattle breeds. That structure means the fat melts at a lower temperature than regular beef fat, which is why a thin slice of Kobe beef dissolves noticeably at body temperature. The Tajima cattle strain in Hyogo Prefecture became the Kobe beef standard over centuries of isolated breeding. Picture a Wagyu cross-section, the deep red muscle threaded so densely with white fat that the pattern looks more like marble stone than meat. Until 2012, no certified Kobe beef was exported from Japan at all. Every Kobe beef item on a restaurant menu outside Japan before that date was using the name without the product. Wagyu is the most expensive beef in the world, but the most expensive ingredient in Japanese cuisine by weight is something else. The first bluefin tuna auctioned at Toyosu Market each January sets a price that has almost nothing to do with hunger. It is a competition between sushi restaurant owners, and single fish have sold for the equivalent of millions of dollars at these New Year auctions. The fish is then broken down and served as nigiri the same evening. Records trace the cultural elevation of otoro, the fatty belly section of bluefin, to Edo period sushi culture when the fattiest cuts became the most prized. Picture a whole tuna weighing 300 kilograms laid on ice at auction, a buyer chalking a bid on a clipboard nearby, the gills still vivid red. Otoro, the fattiest cut from the belly, is ranked at the top of a formal classification system running from lean akami through chutoro to otoro at the peak. Sushi chefs train for years to understand the ranking. The most expensive tuna in Japan is bought in the morning and eaten the same evening, but the most expensive mushroom takes months to appear and cannot be grown at all. Matsutake cannot be cultivated. It grows underground in a specific relationship with the roots of red pine trees in forests that have been slowly disappearing in Japan due to decades of forest change. Japanese matsutake harvests have declined significantly since the mid-20th century, and much of what is now sold in Japan is imported from Korea, China, and Canada. Records trace matsutake foraging in Japan back at least 1,000 years, with mentions in the Manyoshu, Japan's oldest poetry anthology. Picture a single matsutake half emerged from a forest floor covered in pine needles, the brown cap tight and closed, the white stalk still partially buried. The aroma is described as spicy, piney, and unlike any other mushroom. Autumn menus at high-end Kyoto restaurants are built around it. The price per kilogram for top domestic Japanese matsutake rivals that of European truffle. The rarest ingredients require entire seasons to appear, but the most technically demanding dish can be fatal if the chef makes a single mistake. Fugu, pufferfish, contains a toxin in its organs that has no antidote and is not destroyed by cooking. The fish can only be legally prepared by chefs who pass a multi-year licensing exam that includes identifying and removing every organ containing the toxin without contaminating the meat. The license can take 3 years or more to obtain and is specific to fugu preparation alone. The licensing system was formalized in the 20th century after fatalities from improper preparation. Picture fugu sashimi arranged in an elaborate chrysanthemum flower pattern on a plate. The slices so thin that the blue rim of the ceramic plate shows clearly through them. Regular diners describe the taste as mild and slightly firm, unremarkable compared to its reputation. The experience is partly about knowing what the fish is. Fugu demands years of formal training to prepare safely. But the next dish was refined over centuries with no formal system at all. Natto divides Japan more sharply than almost any other food. People in Tokyo and the Kanto region eat it every morning without question. People in Osaka and the Kansai region frequently refuse to eat it entirely. The sticky fermented soybeans stretch into long threads when stirred, and the smell is strong enough that some hotels in Western Japan explicitly prohibit it from their dining rooms. Records trace natto fermentation back over 1,000 years, with some accounts connecting it to soldiers who accidentally fermented soybeans stored in rice straw bags. Picture chopsticks lifting natto from a small styrofoam container, long sticky threads stretching between the beans and the container as the chopsticks rise. It is eaten over rice for breakfast, stirred many times before serving to develop the texture. The East-West divide over natto is one of the clearest cultural fault lines in modern Japanese food. Natto is the most polarizing food in Japan, but the most polarizing food Japan ever exported was not controversial inside Japan at all. Japanese curry came from Britain. The British Royal Navy introduced a mild curry powder to Japan during the Meiji era, itself a simplification of Indian spices adapted for British taste. Japan then transformed it into a thick, slightly sweet, fruity stew served over rice that bears almost no resemblance to Indian curry. It is now one of the most eaten dishes in Japan. The boxed roux product, solid brown blocks snapped into segments and melted into a sauce, standardized it for home cooking by the mid-20th century. Picture the roux block on its foil wrapper snapping into 4 even segments, deep brown and waxy, looking more like dark chocolate than a spice paste. Each brand uses a different spice balance, and brand loyalty in Japanese households is comparable to sports team allegiance in some families. Curry arrived in Japan by ship, and so did the island's most isolated food tradition, which developed precisely because of what ships could not bring in time. Okinawan food is not Japanese food. Okinawa was the independent Ryukyu kingdom with its own language, culture, and cuisine until the late 1800s. The food reflects centuries of trade with China and Southeast Asia, plus American military influence after World War II, layered into a tradition completely distinct from mainland Japan. Okinawans eat more pork per person than any other prefecture in Japan, including parts of the pig that mainland Japanese cuisine rarely uses. Records connect the food to Ryukyu Kingdom cooking with Chinese and Southeast Asian trade routes, shaping the ingredients over centuries. Picture a wok of Goya shampuru, bitter melon slices, pale green against white cubes of tofu, and bright yellow scrambled egg. Bitter melon is almost never used in mainland Japanese cooking. Spam musubi, a local invention combining American canned meat with Japanese rice, became an Okinawan staple and later spread to Hawaii. Okinawa built its food culture in isolation, but Japan's most extreme food isolation story belongs to the northern island. Hokkaido was not part of Japan until the late 1800s. Before Meiji-era settlement from the mainland, it was the territory of the Ainu people, with their own language, culture, and food tradition built around salmon, venison, wild plants, and bear, none of which feature prominently in mainland Japanese cuisine. Modern Hokkaido food is a layer of dairy farming and cold water seafood placed over that older foundation. Picture Hokkaido snow crab legs fanned across a wooden board, orange and white, steam rising into cold, open air. Hokkaido became Japan's primary source of dairy, corn, potatoes, and cold water seafood, including sea urchin, snow crab, and salmon roe. Hokkaido uni is considered the best in Japan. The island feeds a significant part of the country's food supply while also carrying a food tradition that mainland Japan is only recently beginning to formally recognize. Hokkaido's food comes from cold water and open land. The final dish on this list comes from water too, but it is made entirely in the dark, underground for months at a time. Koji is a mold, Aspergillus oryzae, and it is responsible for more of Japanese flavor than any single ingredient. Miso, soy sauce, sake, rice vinegar, and mirin are all products of koji fermentation. Japan has cultivated and refined this organism for over 1,000 years, and it was designated a national microorganism by Japan's Brewing Society in 2006. Without koji, Japanese cuisine as it currently exists would not be possible. Related mold cultures were used in China and Korea before reaching Japan, but Japan's refinement of the organism over centuries produced the flavor profiles that define the cuisine. Picture a wooden fermentation box filled with rice covered in white koji mold, the surface soft and fuzzy, pale as frost, producers describing a faint sweet smell rising from the box. Shio koji, salt mixed with active koji culture, became a global food trend in the 2000s when fermentation culture spread internationally. Western chefs discovered that the same mold Japanese brewers have used for 1,000 years could transform meat, vegetables, and dairy in days rather than months. Koji did not change. The rest of the world just found out it existed. Paella is often seen as the national dish of the entire country, but locals consider it a specific regional pride that strictly belongs to the lunch hour and never to the dinner table. Most accounts say it began in the fields of Valencia, where workers used whatever was crawling or growing nearby in the marshes, including rabbits or snails or even beans. It eventually traveled from these coastal areas to global menus and became the international face of Spanish cooking. The rice is famous for a saffron-stained rice crust that forms at the bottom of the pan and provides a crunchy texture known as sauerkraut. This crust is a sign of a perfectly cooked dish and is highly prized by everyone at the table, who will often scrape the pan to get every bit. You will find it today cooked in giant pans at Sunday family gatherings and specialized rice restaurants that focus on the perfect grain quality and moisture level. The golden color of the rice comes from the saffron threads, which are harvested by hand from small purple flowers in the high plains. This spice is so valuable that it is often kept under lock and key in spice shops across the country. A true version must be cooked over an orange wood fire to give it a smoky aroma that you can smell from blocks away. Many people do not realize that the rice must be a specific short grain variety that can soak up huge amounts of broth without turning into mush or porridge. From the rice fields of the coast, we move to the mountainous heart of the country curing rooms. Jamon Iberico is a legendary meat where the quality is not just about the animal, but the fact that these specific creatures spend their lives acting like forest foragers in the wild. Records suggest this curing method developed across the central and western oak forests of the peninsula over many centuries to preserve meat through the winter. It is now exported as a luxury treasure and is protected by strict laws to ensure it is not faked or mislabeled by sellers who want to profit from the name. When sliced, you can see beaded droplets of oil melting at room temperature because of the specific diet of acorns that the animals eat during the final months of their lives. This oil is clear and smooth and carries the flavor of the forest into every single bite of the dark red meat. It is served in paper-thin slices at weddings and high-end tapas bars as a symbol of hospitality and wealth and tradition. The master carvers who slice this meat are treated like artists and spend years learning exactly how to navigate the bone to get the perfect cut. Each slice should be translucent enough to see light through it, but strong enough to hold its shape. The salt used in the curing process slowly disappears into the muscle over several years of aging in temperature-controlled rooms. If you think that salty cure is intense, wait until you see the potato dish that is not actually a cake. Tortilla espanola has nothing to do with the flat flour wraps of Mexico, as it is a thick and structural wonder made of only 3 or 4 simple ingredients. Many sources say it was created as a cheap and filling way to feed a hungry army during 19th century conflicts when food was very scarce and potatoes were the only thing left. It moved from humble farmhouses to every single bar counter in the country, where it sits as a permanent staple for workers and travelers alike. It looks like golden stacked discs with a soft center that can be slightly runny or firm depending on the cook and the region. Some people insist on adding onions for sweetness, while others say the original version should only have eggs and potatoes and salt. People eat it as a cold snack, a hot meal, or tucked into a crusty sandwich for a quick lunch on the go while walking to work. It is common to see a giant stack of these yellow cakes sitting on a glass counter in a train station or a busy city square. The texture should be creamy and rich, but the outside must have a light brown sear from the olive oil pan. We have covered the heavy hitters, but the naming of the next cold soup is where things get messy. Gazpacho is a famous chilled dish, but for many centuries this tomato soup did not contain a single tomato and relied instead on bread, water, and garlic. It is often traced back to Roman soldiers or shepherds who needed hydration and salt in the hot southern plains during the long summer days. Once tomatoes arrived from overseas, the recipe transformed into the red chilled version known today that everyone recognizes. It appears as a shimmering red liquid that is often strained until it is completely smooth and looks like a bright vegetable juice. You will see it served in glasses as a refreshing drink during the blistering summer months to keep people cool and energized without the need for a heavy meal. Some versions include tiny pieces of cucumber or green pepper or toasted bread floating on top for extra crunch and texture. It is a staple in the South where the heat can reach extreme levels and a hot soup would be impossible to eat. The garlic gives it a sharp kick that stays on the tongue long after the cold liquid has gone down. While gazpacho cooled the farmers, this next fried dough was meant to keep the mountain shepherds warm during the chilly mornings in the peaks. Churros are a global favorite, but legend says they were shaped like the horns of the sheep they were named after to make them easy to fry over an open fire in the fields. Some accounts say Spanish shepherds invented them because they could not find fresh bread, while others suggest they were inspired by fried strips brought from Asia by early sailors. They became a staple of street fairs and morning markets across the globe from Europe to the Americas. They are easily recognized by their ridged dough stars that hold onto sugar and cinnamon in the deep grooves. The dough is simple and salt-based, which creates a perfect balance with the sweetness of the toppings and the chocolate dip. Today they are dipped into thick and melted chocolate for breakfast or a late-night snack after a village festival or a long night out. The chocolate is often so thick that a spoon can stand up straight in the middle of the cup without falling over. You can find specialized shops called churreria that do nothing but fry these dough strips all day long in large circular vats of bubbling oil. From the mountain pastures, we head to the coast for a dish that looks like it is covered in ink. Arroz negro is a striking sight, but the dark color does not come from a special type of rice and instead comes from a natural defensive liquid used by sea creatures like cuttlefish or squid. It is often attributed to the fishing communities along the Mediterranean coast who used every part of their catch to avoid waste during lean years. It transitioned from a fisherman leftovers meal to a sophisticated seaside specialty found in high-end resorts and coastal villas. The jet black grains create a high contrast against the white plates and colorful seafood toppers like pink shrimp or white clams. The flavor is deep and earthy because the ink carries the essence of the seafloor and the natural minerals of the water. It is frequently served with a dollop of white garlic sauce for a sharp color contrast and a punch of flavor that cuts through the richness of the seafood. This sauce is usually made with just garlic and oil, and it turns the black rice into a creamy gray mixture as you stir it in. The rice itself absorbs the ink until every single grain is dyed a deep and shiny onyx color. The sea provides the ink, but the land provides the strange octopus of the vegetable world. Padron peppers are small and green, but eating them is a game of Russian roulette because most are mild while every 10th one is a fiery shock to the senses. Records suggest they were brought from the Americas by monks and grown in a specific rainy northern valley where the soil and climate changed their chemistry over generations. They moved from a regional secret to a staple snack found in almost every tapas bar across the peninsula from north to south. They feature a blistered green skin from being tossed in a hot pan with plenty of oil until they deflate and soften. Most people enjoy them tossed in coarse sea salt and served whole as a snack while they wait for a main course to arrive. The fun of the dish is watching to see which friend at the table gets the one spicy pepper in the bunch as their face turns red. There is no way to tell which one is hot just by looking at them, which adds to the excitement of the meal. They are usually served on a large plate to be shared among a group of people having drinks. Speaking of surprises, the next dish uses a body part that most people never think to cook. Kalos is a hearty stew built around the stomach lining of a cow, which turns into a soft and jelly-like texture after many hours of simmering with spices. Many sources say it originated in the taverns of Madrid as a way to use every part of the animal without any waste during times of poverty. It evolved from a poor man's fuel into a beloved winter comfort food found in the city's oldest and most respected restaurants today. It usually arrives in a bubbling clay pot that stays hot until the very last bite is gone from the dish. The sauce is thick and sticky because of the natural gelatin released during the slow cooking process of the meat. It is often found in traditional slow food restaurants served with spicy sausage and thick crusty bread to soak up every drop of the orange broth. The taste is savory and deep with a hint of heat from the dried peppers used in the base. It is a dish that requires patience because the meat must be cleaned and boiled multiple times before it becomes edible. If a stomach stew sounds intense, the biology of this next creature is even weirder. Pulpo a la galega is a masterpiece of texture, but tradition says the catch must be scared by dipping it in boiling water 3 times to make the meat tender. It is often linked to the rocky Atlantic coast, where these 8-armed creatures are abundant and easy to find in the cold and deep waters. It traveled inland via salt-preserved trade routes to become a fairground favorite even in the middle of the country, far from the ocean waves. You can spot the purple suction cups curling around the edges of the white meat after it is sliced into thick rounds. It is served on round wooden platters with a heavy dusting of red paprika and a drizzle of yellow olive oil. The wood is said to soak up the excess water while keeping the oil on the surface of the meat for the best flavor. It is often served with boiled potatoes that have been cooked in the same water as the meat to absorb the purple color and salty taste. We have seen common catches, but the next item is so rare it is practically liquid gold. Percebes are not plants or fish, but are goose barnacles that look like dragon claws and cost a fortune because of how they are found. They are often harvested from the most dangerous and wave-battered rocks of the northern coast by specialized divers who risk their lives against the tide every day. Because they are so hard to find and dangerous to gather, they remain a high-end delicacy mostly kept within Europe for special occasions. They look like leathery gray tubes with a hard shell at the end that must be cracked open to reach the bright orange meat inside. When you pull the shell away, a small spray of seawater often shoots out, which is part of the experience of eating them. Most enthusiasts eat them plain after being boiled briefly in seawater to preserve the pure ocean taste without any extra spices. The cost of a small plate can be higher than a full steak dinner because of the labor involved in scraping them off the rocks. From the dangerous cliffs, we move to a much safer but equally complex way to process meat. Sobrasada looks like a giant sausage, but it is actually a soft and spreadable paste that never fully hardens like other cured meats. Records suggest it was developed on the Balearic Islands as a way to store meat in a humid climate where traditional drying was impossible. It moved from island farmhouses to becoming a popular topping for warm bread across the mainland in recent decades. It is a bright orange smear that gets its color from the specific sweet peppers grown in the Mediterranean region. The texture is creamy and rich because it contains a high amount of local fat that carries the spice and aroma. It is often drizzled with honey and served on toast for a sweet and salty mix that surprises new travelers who expect a spicy meat. The meat is fermented naturally, which gives it a slight tang that balances out the heavy fat content. That orange color comes from a spice that requires its own specialized processing and historical background. Chorizo is famous for its deep red color, but that hue does not come from the meat or blood, and instead comes from massive amounts of dried and ground peppers known as pimenton. It is often traced back to the Central Plains where pepper drying became a massive local industry following global trade expansion centuries ago when the plants were first brought back. It is one of the most successful exports and is found in various forms from South America to Southeast Asia. The inside shows a coarse fat marbling that melts when heated to create a red oil that flavors everything it touches in the pan. It is used as a base for stews, fried in cider until the skin snaps, or eaten cold on a platter with aged sheep cheese. The spice can be sweet or spicy, depending on which valley the peppers were grown in. Each family has their own secret ratio of meat to fat to spice that they pass down through the years. While the spice is dried, our next item is a tiny fish that is preserved in a very different way. Boccheronis are not the salty brown fish you see on pizza, because when they are prepared this way, they are bright white and taste like vinegar and garlic. Many sources say they were a staple for coastal families who needed to cook fish without using any heat or fire by using the power of acid to firm up the meat. They became the ultimate vinegar snack that balances out heavy and fried appetizers at the start of a long meal in the sun. They appear as silvery skin strips that have been cleaned and marinated until the flesh turns bright white and firm like cooked fish. You will usually see them served in a pool of olive oil with plenty of fresh parsley and chopped garlic on top to keep them fresh. They are often paired with potato chips for a crunchy and acidic combination that is found in every corner bar. The vinegar makes the tiny bones soft enough to eat so you do not have to worry about cleaning them. For our final stop, we leave the vinegar behind for a dish that sounds like a dessert but is actually a mind-bending main course. Morcilla is often called a cake made of rice and onions and blood, but it tastes surprisingly like warm holiday spices and toasted nuts rather than meat. It is often associated with the cold northern plateau where high-energy food was needed for the long winter months in the mountains and valleys. Various versions exist in nearly every province, and each town claims their specific spice mix, including cinnamon or cloves, or even sugar is the original one. It looks like dark obsidian rounds that turn almost black and glossy when they are cooked in a pan with oil. Most people eat it sliced thick and fried until the edges are crispy and the inside is soft and steaming. It is often served with roasted peppers or tucked into a sandwich to provide a rich and savory finish to the day. The rice inside absorbs all the flavor and creates a texture that is more like a dense stuffing than a typical sausage. It is one of the oldest dishes in the region and shows how people learn to use every single resource available to them to create something delicious. The dark color comes from the natural ingredients being cooked down until they are thick and concentrated. Every pizza lover knows Naples invented pizza. But here is the thing. The real Neapolitan pizza has exactly 3 permitted toppings under a protected designation, and most pizzas sold worldwide under that name do not qualify. Naples was feeding street food to the poor in the 1700s, and when Neapolitan families emigrated to the Americas and Australia, they brought the dough with them. Picture that blister-charred crust edge and the wet tomato center that almost looks undercooked because it is supposed to. Every global pizza chain traces its shape back to that street food. The real version is now certified by the European Union. But while everyone knows pizza, almost nobody outside Italy knows what Campania eats the rest of the week. The pasta dish most of the world calls spaghetti bolognese does not exist in Bologna. The real dish is ragu, and it is served with wide, fresh egg tagliatelle, never spaghetti, and the recipe is officially deposited with Bologna's Chamber of Commerce. Records trace this slow-cooked meat sauce to the late 1700s. When Italian immigrants left for other countries, they simplified it with dried pasta because that was what they had. Picture pale yellow ribbon pasta, thin and handmade, coated in a long-cooked meat sauce. Inside Bologna, ordering ragu on spaghetti marks you as a tourist immediately. Emilia-Romagna is also responsible for a dish most people think belongs to the whole country. Carbonara has no cream in it, none. The sauce is made entirely from egg yolk, cured pork cheek, and aged cheese. And the cream version is a non-Italian invention that genuinely upsets Romans. Some accounts connect the dish to post-war Rome in the mid-20th century with a possible link to American ration ingredients passing through the city. It spread globally and became Italy's most copied pasta abroad. Picture glossy spaghetti coated in a sauce that looks almost custardy with crispy cubes of guanciale, which is cured pork cheek, scattered on top. Carbonara is now one of the most searched pasta recipes in the world, and the version most people make would not be recognized in Rome. Cacio e pepe was not invented in a restaurant. It was carried by Roman shepherds on seasonal migrations across mountain passes. 3 ingredients: pasta, pecorino romano cheese, and black pepper. The black pepper was used not just for flavor, but because it was believed to warm the body on cold routes through the hills. The tradition goes back centuries in the Roman countryside, and it stayed regional for most of that time until food media turned it into a global trend in the 2000s. Picture twisted tonarelli pasta coated in a white cheese paste so thick it barely moves. Mastering the emulsification so it does not clump is what separates home cooks from professionals. The north of Italy built its identity on a completely different set of ingredients: butter instead of olive oil, rice instead of pasta. Risotto alla Milanese is golden, and records suggest that color has a strange origin story. Some accounts say a stained glass apprentice working on Milan's Duomo Cathedral, someone known for adding saffron to his paints to deepen the color, allegedly tipped it into a wedding risotto as a joke in the 1500s. Whether that story is accurate or not, saffron became the defining ingredient of the dish. Picture deep gold rice, loose enough to slowly spread on a plate with a butter gloss across the surface. Risotto alla Milanese is traditionally served alongside ossobuco, braised veal shank, and saffron remains the most expensive spice by weight in the world. Further north, the mountains pushed food culture toward preservation and aged dairy. Polenta is everywhere across northern Italy now, but for centuries it carried an insult. Northern Italians who ate it daily were sometimes called polentani, big polenta eaters, by southerners who considered it poor people food. Corn arrived in Italy from the Americas in the 1500s and replaced older grain porridges that had fed farming families for generations. Picture a thick yellow mass being poured directly from a copper pot onto a wooden board. Steam rising, edges spreading out slowly. Polenta is now served in fine dining restaurants as a luxurious side dish. The same food that kept poor farming families alive through winter across the Veneto, Lombardy, and Friuli is now on tasting menus. The northeast corner of Italy has its own story entirely, shaped by centuries of Austrian rule. The dumplings in Trentino Alto Adige are more Central European than Italian, and they were here before Italy was. This alpine region was part of the Austrian Empire until 1919, and the cuisine still sits between two cultures. The same bread dumplings, round and dense, served floating in broth, go by different names depending on which valley you are standing in. In Italian, they are canderli. In German, they are Nudel. In the same region, you can eat traditional Tyrolean speck, a lightly smoked cured ham, alongside fresh pasta, and nobody considers it unusual. The food map and the political map still do not fully match here. Crossing south through the mountains, Venice built its food identity on what arrived by sea. Salt cod was never caught in Italian waters. Venice became the biggest European trading hub for Norwegian and Icelandic cod, and the fish arrived dried and salted, designed to survive long journeys without refrigeration. Here's a detail that confuses even Italians: the word bacala technically refers to salt-preserved cod. But in Venice, it is often used for stockfish, which is dried without salt, a different product with a different texture and preparation. Catholic fasting traditions spread salted cod across the entire country over several centuries. Picture pale white dried fish planks stacked in a market stall, rigid and almost unrecognizable as fish. In Venice today, bacala mantecato is whipped into a creamy spread and served on bread as one of the city's most traditional bar snacks. Another preservation technique, far older, defines the food of the mountains further inland. In Colonnata, a tiny village in the Apuan Alps above the Carrara marble quarries, pork fat is aged in basins carved from the same marble Michelangelo used for his sculptures. This is lardo, pure cured pork fat, and it is considered a delicacy. The marble keeps the temperature stable in a way no manufactured container replicates, and mineral compounds from the stone are thought by some producers to contribute to the curing process. Picture translucent white slabs resting inside veined marble basins, layered with rosemary and garlic in a cave-cool room. Thinly sliced, it melts on warm bread within seconds. It holds a protected geographical designation, which means legally it can only be made in Colonnata. Tuscany's food identity is deceptively simple, and the richness comes not from elaborate ingredients, but from technique. Bistecca alla Fiorentina must come from one specific cattle breed, Chianina, one of the oldest domestic cattle breeds in the world, with records in the Val di Chiana going back over 2,000 years. A proper Fiorentina weighs at least 1.2 kilograms, over 2.5 pounds, and it is always served rare to blue rare. Picture the cross-section of a T-bone with a bright red interior and a charred crust on the outside, the bone still in, the steak thick enough to stand upright on a plate. Ordering it well done in Florence is considered a serious offense against the dish. The European Union once temporarily banned it during BSE scares in cattle, and Tuscans treated this as a regional crisis. Moving south, Umbria, the only landlocked region in central Italy, built its pantry from the forest floor. Black truffles cannot be farmed in any conventional sense. They grow underground in a hidden biological relationship with specific tree roots, and researchers still do not fully understand how to trigger that connection reliably. Dogs are trained for years just to find them by smell, working through Umbrian forests near Norcius and Spoleto in December and January. Picture a lumpy, dirt-covered black mass, roughly fist-sized, held carefully in gloved hands after being dug from the ground. The price spikes every year because supply cannot be predicted. Norcia has been considered the black truffle capital of Italy since Roman times. The coasts of central and southern Italy developed entirely differently, and the sea drove the kitchen. Bottarga is dried, pressed fish roe, and it is essentially the parmesan of the sea. Sardinia's version uses gray mullet, caught in the lagoons around Cabras on the island's western coast. Sicily's version uses tuna. A single block can take weeks to cure and costs more per gram than most cured meats. Some accounts trace the technique to Phoenician traders, while others say it arrived via Arab trade networks across the Mediterranean. Picture an amber-tinted roe slab being shaved over pasta with a hand grater, thin curls of it falling like very expensive salt. Sardinian bottarga is now exported to Japan, where it is treated as a luxury ingredient. A few hours away on the mainland, another product uses thyme as its main ingredient, but the process is even more tightly controlled. Every wheel of real Parmigiano Reggiano takes roughly 550 liters of milk and at least 12 months of aging. But the most surprising part of the production is the inspection. A consortium examiner taps each wheel with a small hammer, listening for hollow spots inside. If the sound is wrong, the wheel fails and cannot carry the name. It gets sold as generic cheese. Records trace this cheese to Benedictine monks in Emilia as far back as the 1200s. Picture the examiner moving along rows of golden wheels, tapping methodically, the craggy textured cut face of a broken wheel showing the white interior. Parmesan sold outside Italy under that looser name is a separate product entirely. Only cheese made in the specific zone around Parma, Reggio Emilia, and Modena under these rules qualifies. A few hours south, another product uses wind as its main ingredient. Prosciutto di Parma is cured with two ingredients only, pork and salt. But the specific geography of the hills around Parma is considered as essential as either one. Sea winds from the Ligurian coast pass through gaps in the Apennine Mountains, lose their moisture, and arrive in those hills as dry, steady air. Move the curing facility 30 kilometers in any direction, and the protected designation no longer applies. Picture whole hams hanging in rows inside hillside sheds with open slat windows. The wind moving through steadily, the hams slowly losing moisture over months. The pigs are often fed on whey left over from Parmigiano Reggiano production, which means the two most famous products of the same region are literally connected by the same food chain. The Deep South tells a completely different story, shaped by poverty, heat, and centuries of outside influence. Ligurian focaccia is eaten at breakfast. Picture a flat sheet of dough so drenched in olive oil and brine that the surface shines, with a grid of fingertip dimple marks across it. Edges slightly crisp, center still soft. This is focaccia genovese, and it is nothing like the thick, herby bread most of the world calls focaccia. The word likely connects to the Latin word for hearth, and Genoese workers have been eating it in the morning for generations, sometimes dipped into a cappuccino. A combination outsiders find strange and locals consider completely normal. The dough evolved into dozens of regional variations as you move down the Ligurian coast. Sicily, further south, absorbed cuisines from 3 different continents, and the results are unlike anywhere else in Italy. Pasta alla norma was named after an opera. Some accounts say a diner in Catania tasted this combination of eggplant, tomato, and salted ricotta over pasta and declared it as great a masterpiece as Bellini's opera Norma. Whether that moment happened exactly that way or not, the name became official and now defines Catanese food identity. The eggplant itself arrived in Sicily via Arab trade routes centuries before that, and without it, the dish does not exist. Picture purple-tinged fried eggplant cubes over ridged pasta, with grated ricotta salata falling like snow across the surface. Sicily's eggplant cultivation, introduced by Arab traders, transformed southern Italian cooking entirely. That Arab influence shows up even more directly in the next dish. Caponata is a sweet and sour vegetable stew, and that combination of vinegar and sugar in the same savory dish, what Sicilians call agrodolce, is a direct inheritance from the Arab traders who controlled Sicily for over 200 years between the 9th and 11th centuries. No dish like it exists in mainland Italian cooking. Eggplant, green olives, capers, celery, vinegar, and sugar cooked together until the flavors collapse into one thick, dark, glossy mass. Picture that stew sitting in a bowl, the green of the olives and capers cutting through the deep brown of the eggplant. A small amount of oil sitting on top. Caponata keeps for days and improves overnight, and it was originally made in large batches specifically for long sea journeys. The mainland South developed its own version of poverty cuisine, and it is now celebrated worldwide. In a small town called Spillinga in Calabria, pork fat and chili peppers were combined into a paste soft enough to squeeze directly from its casing. This is induja, and the extreme heat comes from Calabrian chili peppers, which also act as a natural preservative in the cured meat. It was designed entirely to use every part of the pig that had no other obvious use. Some accounts connect the name to the French word andouille, via Napoleonic era influence on the region. Others disagree. Picture deep red paste oozing slowly from a cut sausage casing onto a wooden board. Almost liquid spreading on its own. Chefs worldwide now use it as a flavor carrier, a small amount dissolved into a pasta sauce or spread under cheese on pizza adds fat-carried chili heat that builds over several minutes. Campania has one more dish that defines Southern identity, and it was born from the same kind of scarcity. After World War II, wood fuel in Naples was scarce and bakery ovens often could not be heated. So the dough was fried in oil instead. Pizza Frita, fried pizza, was cheaper and faster than the baked version, and it kept entire neighborhoods fed during the post-war years. Most people outside Naples have never heard of it. Picture a golden bubbled dough pocket draining on paper, the filling of ricotta and scraps of cured pork visible where the seam has separated. One Neapolitan woman, Elena Esposito, I became locally famous for frying pizza on the street to support her family while her husband was in prison. The dish carries that specific history. And then there is the dish that never made it out of its home region at all because it requires a way of life that barely exists anywhere else. Sardinia is so geographically isolated and has been for so long that its food culture evolved almost separately from the rest of Italy. Pane carousel is a paper-thin, twice-baked flatbread designed to last for months without spoiling so that shepherds could carry it into the hills without resupply. Picture translucent, cracker-thin discs stacked like sheets of paper, edges crumbling slightly, almost light enough to see through. Some accounts trace this bread back thousands of years in Sardinian pastoral tradition. Sardinia also has the world's highest documented concentration of people who live past 100 years old, and researchers have studied whether the traditional diet built around this bread, local pecorino, and almost no processed food plays a role. No conclusion has been reached, but the question is still open. The island's food was never designed for a restaurant menu. It was designed to keep a person alive and working outdoors for months at a time with no refrigeration, no resupply, and no backup. Sardinia did not borrow from the rest of Italy. It simply did not need to. Fish and chips. The traditional pairing only became standard in the 1860s. Before that, fried fish and chips were sold separately by different vendors on London streets. Fish frying came from Jewish immigrants fleeing persecution, chips from Belgian influence combined in working-class London neighborhoods. The combination spread through industrial towns as cheap, filling meal for factory workers who needed quick energy. Fresh cod flakes into perfect white chunks when the muscle fibers separate during frying in hot oil. Still the most recognized British food globally, found in every British pub and seaside town. But chips were not the only thing Brits wrapped in newspaper for takeaway meals. Bangers and mash. Bangers got their name because cheap wartime sausages had so much water they literally exploded in the pan with loud pops. Sausage-making tradition from medieval times. Mashed potatoes added when potatoes arrived from Americas in the 16th century. Became pub standard when potatoes proved cheaper than bread for working families struggling to make ends meet. Sausage casings are traditionally made from clean sheep intestines that stretch like natural balloons when stuffed with meat. Every British pub menu today often served with rich onion gravy poured over the top. Speaking of things that pop and sizzle in hot pans, full English breakfast. The full breakfast was actually invented by hotels in the 1950s as a marketing gimmick. Victorian breakfasts were much simpler affairs with just bread and tea for most families. Started as hearty farm breakfast to fuel long days of physical labor. Expanded during Victorian prosperity. Hotels marketed it to tourists as authentic British experience they could not get anywhere else. Black pudding gets its dark color from pig blood that coagulates when heated in the pan. Weekend tradition in homes across Britain, all-day breakfast served in cafes and greasy spoons. But some British foods hide their true nature even better than this hearty morning meal. Shepherd's pie. Real shepherd's pie uses lamb meat exclusively. If it is made with beef, it is technically cottage pie according to traditional definitions. Created in late 1700s as clever way to use leftover roasted meat, often from Sunday dinner leftovers, became standard comfort food in working-class homes across Britain and Ireland during Industrial Revolution. Potato topping forms golden peaks when fork marks create extra surface area for browning in the oven. Comfort food staple today, frozen versions available in every supermarket freezer section across the country. Another dish that is all about using what is left over from previous meals, Cornish pasty. The thick pastry crust was designed as a disposable handle for miners working underground. Miners would eat the filling and throw away the dirty crust contaminated with arsenic from their hands. Cornwall tin mines, 1200s, designed specifically for workers who could not wash their hands during long shifts. Miners carried the tradition to Australia, Mexico, and American mining towns during gold rush periods. Proper crimping creates 20-plus folds that seal completely without any gaps to prevent filling from leaking out. Protected status food under European law. Only pasties made in Cornwall can be called Cornish pasty legally. But not all British foods were designed for dirty hands and dangerous working conditions. Bubble and squeak. The name comes from the actual sounds it makes in the pan during cooking. Bubbling and squeaking as moisture escapes from the vegetables hitting hot fat. 1800's way to use leftover vegetables from Sunday roast dinner without wasting precious food became Monday tradition in households across Britain as families stretched their weekly food budget. Cabbage leaves release steam through their natural pores, creating the signature sounds that gave the dish its name. Still made every Monday in traditional British homes that follow old customs. The sounds of cooking lead us to something much quieter and more refined: steak and kidney pie. The kidneys are not just thrown in for flavor, they actually help tenderize the beef during the long cooking process. Medieval England, using organ meats that would otherwise spoil quickly in an era before refrigeration, became pub food staple when taverns needed hearty meals that could simmer all day without constant attention. Kidney enzymes break down tough beef fibers, creating tender meat that falls apart with a fork. Traditional pub fare across Britain, often served with thick gravy and mushy peas on the side. From organ meat chemistry to something that never sees heat during preparation: jellied eels. The jelly forms naturally from eel bones during the cooking process. No gelatin added, the fish creates its own aspic when cooled to room temperature. London East End tradition: cheap protein from Thames eels caught fresh from the river daily. Stayed mostly in London, never spread widely across Britain, despite attempts to popularize it elsewhere. Eel bones contain natural collagen that turns liquid when heated, solid when cold, creating the jelly texture. Still sold from traditional pie and mash shops in East London that have operated for generations. From natural jelly formation to something artificially preserved through different methods. Haggis. It is cooked inside a sheep's stomach, which acts like a natural pressure cooker and keeps everything moist. Scotland medieval times, using every part of the animal to avoid waste in harsh Highland conditions, became symbol of Scottish identity, especially Burns Night celebrations across the world every January. Sheep's stomach lining is naturally waterproof and expands like a balloon when filled with the oatmeal mixture. Burns Night dinners worldwide. Scottish restaurants from Edinburgh to New York serving authentic versions. From Scotland national dish to England most expensive culinary creation, beef Wellington, named after the Duke of Wellington who defeated Napoleon, but the dish costs more than most people's weekly food budget. French technique adapted for British tastes, popularized in high-end restaurants during the 20th century revival, became symbol of fine dining skill that separates amateur cooks from professional chefs. Many chefs judge each other by their Wellington technique and presentation standards. Puff pastry creates hundreds of paper-thin layers that trap steam and puff up during careful baking process. Restaurant challenge dish, Gordon Ramsay's signature creation featured on television cooking shows worldwide. From the most expensive restaurant dish to something that costs almost nothing to make. Bread and dripping. This Depression-era food is now served in trendy restaurants as artisanal heritage cuisine with fancy names. The same exact recipe, 100 times the price in upscale establishments charging premium rates. Working-class necessity, using leftover fat from Sunday roast to make cheap meals stretch through the week. Kept families fed during wartime rationing, nearly disappeared completely, now returning as heritage food movement gains momentum. Animal fat solidifies into white crystals when cold, melts clear when warmed and spread on toast. Hipster cafes and nose-to-tail restaurants charging premium prices for what was once poverty food. From recycled fat to carefully controlled fermentation processes in modern cheese making. Stilton cheese. The blue veins are created by piercing the cheese with copper wires during the careful aging process. The metal helps the mold spread evenly throughout the wheel in controlled patterns. Stilton Village, 1700s, though ironically it can no longer be made there due to strict legal restrictions, became one of only British cheeses with protected status under European law protecting traditional methods. Penicillium roqueforti mold needs oxygen channels to grow its characteristic blue-green threads through the dense cheese. Christmas cheese boards across Britain, high-end restaurants serving it with port wine and crackers, from controlled mold cultivation to controlled timing in the kitchen. Yorkshire pudding. The secret is putting the batter into smoking hot oil that sizzles immediately on contact with the mixture. If the oil is not hot enough, it stays flat forever and never rises properly. Yorkshire region, cooked under roasting meat to catch the drippings and add rich flavor to the batter, became Sunday roast essential across all of Britain within just a few generations of its invention. Hot oil instantly sets the bottom while steam puffs up the sides, creating the characteristic bowl shape. Every Sunday roast dinner today now made in individual muffin tins instead of one large pan. But the strangest British food breaks every rule we know about cooking and food preparation. Toad in the hole. Despite the name, no amphibians are involved, just sausages baked inside Yorkshire pudding batter. The dish got its name because the sausages poking through the risen batter look like toads emerging from holes. 18th century invention when cooks realized they could stretch expensive meat by surrounding it with cheap batter. Became working class favorite because one dish provided both meat and starch in a single pan. The batter rises around the sausages, creating pockets that trap the meat juices and fat for extra flavor. Still served in pubs across Britain, often with onion gravy and vegetables on the side. From amphibian names to something made from brewery waste. Marmite. It is made from the leftover yeast sludge from beer brewing operations across the country. Literally, the waste product that breweries used to throw away before someone figured out its potential value. Burton-upon-Trent, 1902. German scientist figured out how to make the waste edible and surprisingly nutritious. Became uniquely British obsession. Never caught on anywhere else despite aggressive marketing attempts worldwide over decades. Dead yeast cells break down into glutamates during the complex processing that transforms waste into food. The same compounds that make Parmesan cheese addictive to human taste buds and create umami flavor. Love it or hate it marketing campaign that became cultural phenomenon found in every British kitchen. Greece claims it. Turkey claims it. Several Arab countries claim it. Serious food historians have looked at this for decades and still will not pick a side, which tells you something important, which is that this dessert belongs to a whole world of cooking, not one kitchen. Many sources trace the layered nut and pastry style back to Ottoman palace kitchens, and from there trade routes carried it in every direction at once. Every region it reached swapped in whatever was local. Pistachios here, walnuts there, honey in one country, simple syrup in another. The phyllo dough gets stretched so thin that in traditional kitchens, you can genuinely read text through a single sheet, and most places still do that entirely by hand. The origin war is still going, nobody has won, and the dessert keeps traveling anyway. The next one has a name that is basically a beautiful lie. Gulab Jamun translates roughly to rose berry, which sounds very Indian, very ancient, very of the land. The twist is that this dessert did not come from Indian kitchens at all. It arrived through Persian and Mughal influence, most likely descended from a Middle Eastern sweet. And Mughal court cooks adapted it using milk that had been cooked so long and so slowly that almost all the water was gone, and what remained was a dense, kneadable dough. Milk becomes dough. British colonial-era cookbooks then standardized the recipe, and packaged versions carried it into South Asian diaspora communities worldwide. Now it shows up at every South Asian wedding, every Eid celebration, every Diwali spread, sitting in rose-tinted syrup with steam curling off the dark golden spheres. A cultural import that became more beloved than almost anything that was originally there. The next one was born from a mistake nobody admitted to for decades. Brigadeiro is named after a Brazilian Air Force general who never made a single one. In the 1940s, chocolate truffles were created specifically to raise campaign funds for him. People loved them, and the name attached itself permanently. Brazil during that period had trouble getting imported goods, so condensed milk became the workaround for real chocolate. Just 4 ingredients: condensed milk, butter, cocoa powder, chocolate sprinkles cooked together until the whole mixture pulls away from the pan as one glossy mass. Diaspora communities carried it to the US, Portugal, and Japan. It resists being made fancy. It does not need to be. The next one has an even stranger political backstory, and two entire countries are still arguing about it right now. Australia and New Zealand have been in a completely unresolved fight over pavlova for nearly 100 years. Food historians found a recipe in a New Zealand cookbook from the 1920s, and Australians dispute it every single year without fail. The dessert is named after Russian ballerina Anna Pavlova, who toured the Southern Hemisphere and apparently inspired bakers in both countries, though some accounts point to New Zealand, others to Australia, and neither side has definitive proof. The outside bakes into a hard, crisp shell, and the inside stays completely soft, almost marshmallow-like, because the whole thing cooks at a very low temperature for a surprisingly long time. 2 countries, 1 dessert, 0 resolution. Tart Tatin was supposedly invented because someone dropped a regular apple tart, panicked, flipped it, served it anyway, and pretended the whole time that this was intentional. The most repeated version traces it to the Tatin sisters and their hotel in the Loire Valley in the late 1800s. The technique is what makes it genuinely special. Apples go into the pan first with butter and sugar, and heat caramelizes everything from underneath before the pastry even touches them, building a deep amber coating that a regular top-down tart could never get, accidentally invented by panic. The next one was deliberately perfected, and it took a legal battle to settle who gets the credit. Multiple Italian regions fought so hard over who invented tiramisu that one region actually registered it as an officially protected traditional product. Her full legal move designed to end the argument, which of course did not fully end the argument. Most food historians point to northeastern Italy, the Veneto region, sometime in the 1960s or 1970s. The name means lift me up, which is an enthusiastic thing to name a dessert. The technique is deceptively precise. Ladyfinger biscuits get dipped in coffee for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to soften, short enough that they do not dissolve. The entire texture of the final dessert depends on that one decision. Today, it gets riffed on constantly. Matcha tiramisu, strawberry tiramisu, pistachio tiramisu, all built on that same dipped biscuit foundation. The next one does not need any legal protection because it physically cannot be faked. Mochi is made from a type of rice that acts almost like a completely different food. Regular rice stays grainy and separate when cooked. This specific variety, when pounded, transforms into a stretchy, elastic, almost rubbery dough. Same plant, completely different result. Japanese records go back over 1,000 years, and this was not originally casual snack food. It appeared in religious ceremonies, New Year rituals, and imperial offerings. The starch structure is genuinely different from regular rice, and when pounded hard enough, those starches link together and create real elasticity with nothing added. No glue, no gel, no thickener. Then mochi ice cream became a mainstream export in the 1990s and 2000s and landed in every U.S. grocery freezer aisle. A grain that acts like rubber. The next one looks completely ordinary until you bite into it. Klipon is a small green rice ball that looks completely harmless. Then you bite into it and the palm sugar inside has fully liquefied into a warm syrup that bursts directly into your mouth, which surprises basically everyone the first time, every time. Close variations appear throughout Southeast Asia under different names, suggesting a shared regional origin that predates modern borders entirely. The vivid green color comes from pandan leaf juice, a tropical plant used across Southeast Asian cooking the way vanilla is used in Western baking. The outside is coated in shredded coconut, so you get soft rice, coconut exterior, and liquid sugar center all at once. The next one is familiar and crispy, but with an origin story almost nobody has heard. Spain claims churros. Mexico claims them just as passionately. But some food historians trace a similar dough technique to Portuguese sailors who may have encountered something like it during trade with China. then Spain adapted it, then Mexico made it entirely its own. Some accounts say Portuguese traders, others say Spanish shepherds invented them as campfire food. Neither is confirmed. Spanish colonization carried churros into Latin America, and Mexican churros became thicker, often filled, buried in cinnamon sugar in a way that feels like a completely separate dessert from the Spanish original. The star-shaped ridge from the churro press is not decorative. It creates more surface area, which means more crunch per bite and faster oil penetration during frying. Crispy, simple, still contested. Cholezard is a soft yellow rice pudding, and it looks almost plain. The ingredient that gives it that yellow color is the most expensive spice in the world by weight, and Iran produces a very significant portion of the global supply. This bowl contains something more valuable per gram than most precious metals. Saffron comes from the tiny thread-like part of a specific crocus flower. Each flower produces only 3 threads. Every single one must be picked by hand because there is no machine capable of doing it. This was a Persian ceremonial dish traditionally made for religious occasions and community gatherings, the expense making it reserved for moments that mattered. The most expensive spice in the world sitting inside something that looks completely ordinary. Halo means mix, and the entire philosophy is that there is no fixed recipe. Every region, every family, every street vendor makes a completely different version, which makes it almost impossible to standardize or export at any meaningful scale. The dessert was influenced by Japanese shaved ice traditions brought to the Philippines in the early to mid-20th century, and Filipino cooks kept layering in local ingredients until it became something entirely unrecognizable from its starting point. The purple ube yam on top gets its vivid color from natural pigments in the yam, the same family of pigments responsible for purple cabbage and red wine, brilliant and completely unprocessed. Ube has now broken into mainstream U.S. food culture. Ube lattes, ube ice cream at major chains, ube everything. Impossible to standardize, impossible to fully export. Alfajores are 2 crumbly cornstarch cookies sandwiching dulce de leche, a thick caramel-like spread made by heating sweetened milk for a very long time. Here is where it gets interesting. The traditional home method of making dulce de leche inside a sealed can is genuinely dangerous, and commercial versions are made in pressure-controlled environments specifically because of this. What makes dulce de leche remarkable is that no actual caramel is involved. The milk sugars and proteins are heated together long enough that they slowly brown and bond, creating that deep caramel flavor entirely on their own. The cookie itself has roots in Moorish Spanish cooking, and Spanish colonizers brought it to South America, where dulce de leche became the obvious filling. Caramel made entirely from milk. The next one is fermented before it is even cooked. Jalebi starts as a batter that sits and bubbles for hours, sometimes overnight before it gets piped into hot oil. Every batch carries a very slight, almost hidden sour note underneath all that sugar syrup, and that tension between sour and sweet is the entire point. Many food historians trace it to a Middle Eastern sweet called zalabaya, and records suggest it traveled to the Indian subcontinent through traders over many centuries, eventually becoming so embedded in Indian festive culture that its outside origins are rarely discussed. The spiral shape is not decorative. The looping motion used to pipe the batter into oil creates ridges that trap and hold syrup after frying, making every bite equally saturated all the way through. Fermented, fried, drowned in syrup. The last one is the strangest thing in this entire video. Those green worm-like strands in sendal are not noodles, not pasta, not any grain at all. They are made from rice flour and pandan juice, pressed through a perforated mold directly into ice water, where they firm into their shape almost the instant they make contact. Javanese texts from around the 13th century describe something very similar, making this one of the oldest documented cold desserts in Southeast Asia. Vietnam has a version, Thailand has a version, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore. Each country developed its own name, while the core idea kept traveling for centuries. The green color is heat sensitive. If the pandan liquid gets too warm during pressing, the color dulls to olive. Getting that vivid green requires pressing into genuinely ice-cold water, which also sets the shape almost instantly. Coconut milk pours over shaved ice, palm sugar drizzles on top, and the green strands settle into the bowl looking like something from a completely different category of food entirely. Rice flour pressed through a mold into ice water, finished with coconut milk and palm sugar, eaten across an entire region for roughly 700 years.